Good evening, IB Nation. Welcome to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. I'm Vince D'Addario. That guy's Brian Driscoll. That guy down there is Trevor Trowbridge. And we are diving headfirst in this IB Nation or IB whatever After Dark.
Yes, sir.
Irish Breakdown After Dark. We're heading headfirst into Penn State since it is the big game, the semifinals down in Miami, the Orange Bowl, Notre Dame, Penn State. It's going to be here before you know it because the game's on Thursday. It feels like I'm coaching freshman football all over again. But the game's on Thursday night.
I have just stopped trying to pay attention what day it is.
Right.
I'm just now like 6 days out from the game.
Right.
I'll get my calendar and my days of the week back on track like in a month. Hopefully.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And hopefully it will be a month when all is said and done at that point. But guys, we've got a lot to jump into and not a whole lot of days to do it, to be perfectly honest with you. And so just so kind of everybody knows what is coming with Irish Breakdown, Brian is traveling down to Miami and he's traveling tomorrow. So
yes,
this is there'll be a show tomorrow, I believe, before you guys leave.
We're going to go live at noon tomorrow.
Okay.
Because I got to leave at 3 o'clock ish to get to the airport in time to head down to Miami.
Yeah. So from that point forward, so there'll be a show tonight. Obviously, we're going to kind of give our first looks at Penn State, and then there's going to be a show tomorrow. Then Brian travels, and then from then on, his shows will be from down in Miami. So that'll be fantastic.
And I'm gonna have like Miami Vice shirts on every day. You know what I mean? I'm gonna look like Don Johnson with the rolled up. Yes, sir.
Sleeves a little bit. Yes, yeah, exactly. Love that.
I might have like Will Smith, the Will Smith Miami song playing in the background during it, just on loop.
To Miami.
So yeah.
Yeah, I got you. Yep, I got you.
So
so that's
kind of playing Two Live Crew, but then I was like, no, they suck, so I won't be playing that. But that's how we're gonna roll this week, buddy.
So we are. That's the schedule for the week, and
IB meet and greet based on the feedback I'm getting will be the day of the game.
Oh wow!
So we'll figure something out that day, and we'll just kind of hang out until it's time to go to the game. So that's what we're going to do. So I'll get some more particulars as we get closer to the game, but we're going to meet up day of the game.
Nice. So hey, mark your calendars, people. I've had people reach out about wanting to meet up, so there you go. So I will pass that along to the people that have reached out to me, and they're probably watching the show anyway, so it's all good. So yeah, that's going to be the plan here for the week, and Trevor and I are going to hold it down here at the homestead, and then of course we'll have the post-game show immediately following the game, and talking about what we hope will be a Notre Dame victory and what that looks like moving forward. But today we are diving into Penn State, and we're the first thing we're going to do in Penn State prep is we had an opportunity to go to practice today, Brian and I, and it was a very small window of practice. And if anybody's on social media, they can obviously, see what people have been saying. We wanted to give you our thoughts on everything. We had a 3-period viewing of practice, and we got to see some special teams drill work and then a little bit of individual drill work and some stretch and things like that. Very similar to what we usually get to see during fall camp and things like that. It's the first part of practice. And so, Brian, let's kind of jump into kind of our takeaways from that very short window of practice. It's our second peek into practice in a week, which is actually kind of nice. But your thoughts on kind of what we saw, what we didn't see, things of that nature.
Yeah, so before we dive into the Penn State stuff, we'll talk about this, and then we'll also talk a little about the Cooper Flanigan injury and just update the injuries, what we saw. But, I mean, when you look at what we got to see today, Vince and Trev, it's more about, okay, who's healthy, who looks good, who's out there. Saw Jeremiah Love. He had the knee brace on. Didn't look like he liked having the knee brace on, but nobody likes having a knee brace on. I thought he was moving very well. There's a period in drills where he put his injured knee on the ground and drove off on it in drills. That's right there. He's fine. You're not doing that. Not fine as in like he's 100%. He's not going to be 100% the rest of the year, but we also saw him go 98 yards for a touchdown with a knee brace on against Indiana. So, and practice braces are a lot different than game braces.
And explain that real quick.
Practice braces are meant for full protection.
Right.
Whereas game braces are meant to give more flexibility, more freedom of movement. They provide some support, but not quite as much as what a practice brace does. So,
correct.
He was out there going through drills. I mean,
he didn't like it. He didn't like the brace. Let's just call it what it is, right?
Didn't either. He was constantly fumbling with it, which doesn't mean that his knee is injured. It means he doesn't like the brace is uncomfortable. So, but as far as movement, he was fine. He was cutting off of his right knee. Didn't show any signs of hesitation, concern. He was going through drills probably half speed. Everybody else was going through drills slightly more than half speed. I mean, there was no periods that we saw where they were just turning it loose. Looked fine. Howard Cross looked fine. I mean, he still had his ankle taped, but from my understanding, and again, I'm not trying to share a medical opinion, but since Marcus Freeman didn't talk about it at the press conference the other day, my understanding is that Howard Cross simply cramped up against Georgia. And apparently, Vince, you had heard this as well down there. Apparently, it was very humid down in the field. Yeah. And he simply just cramped up at that particular moment. Yep. At any point in time, he was standing there ready to go back in. He was okay. None of the other guys that we've seen looked like there were any issues. Kingston Viliama-Asa is still clearly working his way back. You know, there's certain drills he doesn't do as quickly as others, but he clearly was good enough to play. Right. Saturday or on Thursday. And in critical moments, by the way. He's going to be ready to go again here this week, and he's only going to get healthier and healthier as Notre Dame hopefully gets deeper into the season. So got a chance to see that, and didn't look like anybody that we weren't expecting to be out was limited or out. And so obviously that's a good thing. And looking at some of the other things we saw, like what we saw today, there's nothing that we're going to learn about, RJ Oben or Junior Tuilamaka or Jadarian Price or the receivers, the quarterbacks, just because of what we saw. There was nothing that they necessarily turned loose. So there's a couple things we observed from the practice, Vince. Number one, CJ Carr was throwing. And I tell you, there's not many things in life, Trev, you know, that you see someone when they're just in a moment of pure joy. There's not a lot of things that bring Vince the kind of smile on his face that he gets whenever he's watching CJ Carr throw a football. I mean, it's like Vince is going to end up having two jobs here pretty soon. He's already VP of the Cam Hart fan club. So he's already there, and he's pretty soon going to be the VP of the CJ Carr fan club. But look, the last time we talked about seeing him, he was throwing the ball down the field. He was throwing 25-yard ins, but during warm-ups, he was not given full zip, and he would kind of, he was basically on a pitch count is what we were talking about. Today, no pitch count from what we could see in drills. Yep. And I don't know if he was on a pitch count in practice, but in drills, no pitch count. And this was the most zip he's got on the ball. He was zinging the ball. Like he threw two gorgeous balls last time we saw Vince during 7-on-7. He hit a 15-yard in cut, just drilled a guy right in the gut, and then hit about a 20, 25-yard over route right over top of a linebacker right in front of a safety. So I knew then he's fine. He's just working his way back to full. It's like in spring training. Your first spring training start, you don't go out there and throw the ball, throw 100 pitches, right? You don't use your whole arsenal. You're kind of building your pitch count up, right? That's basically what CJ Carr has been doing here. And today, I mean, Vince, just the outcuts were just coming out, I mean, just in drills, he was just doing it. Look sharp. And here's the big concern I had. I never had concern about, is he going to be healthy? Is there some long-term issue? Because from what my understanding of what his injury was, it was normal for kids these days that a lot of times kids will have it in the spring, but when they're throwing year round, it was kind of related to that. It wasn't any kind of contact injury, anything like that. So they're just kind of building him back up after shutting him down for a little bit of time. The big concern I have, guys, with things like that is sometimes, we saw this a little bit with Jimmy Clausen, after that type of elbow thing, you sometimes see them come back with different mechanics, or maybe they lose a little bit of their accuracy. That didn't happen with Jimmy. Jimmy's mechanics changed a little bit, and that was also partly to the fact that Jimmy played with a foot injury his last couple years, especially his junior year. So he had to change his mechanics to deal with that because it was off of his plant foot. But just a little bit of that as a freshman because of the elbow thing. Watching CJ today, Vince, I saw no change to his throwing motion, and his accuracy was every bit as on point as it was before. So that was a great sign. And, of course, Kenny spun it really good. Steve was spinning it pretty good today as well. I mean, they all like, guys, even whenever we see this group of quarterbacks going through practice, it's like it's fun to watch because they're very, very talented throwers. Blake Hebert was there as well. He's got a really nice arm. He looks like a college junior physically. Like he's a well-built kid, thick lower body. Yeah, needs a ton of work mechanically. Oh yeah, he doesn't use his feet at all.
Nope, it's all arm.
Yeah, all arm.
Yeah.
And so it'll come out nice, but then at the end, it'll just kind of die just a little bit compared to the other guys. As he learns to kind of drive off that back foot a little bit and use a little bit more torque as a thrower, that ball's really going to explode out.
Yep.
So it was good to see that. The other thing I noticed, Vince, and I put this in my practice report, you and I have been doing this a long time. You've actually been going to practices a lot longer than I have, because you started about, 5-6 years before I even got on the beat. And there's just guys that come along, and even sometimes they don't necessarily play right away, but the first time you see him, you're just like, that dude looks different. That he just moves different. It was that way the first time I saw Michael Floyd at the Army All-American game. There were some really good receivers down there. Dan Buckner, Jonathan, what was the guy's name that played at Pitt? Oh, goodness gracious. It's a big kid that played at Pitt. I'm trying to remember his name.
The Baldwin kid?
Jonathan Baldwin. Yes, thank you. He was down there. I saw some dudes. They were going up against Patrick Johnson, whose name is now Patrick Peterson. And you just watch Michael Floyd, and you're like, that cat's different from all the other guys in the field. And you see that every time you go to the Army All-American game, or you see that when you go to these All-Star games. There's just cats that stand out. I remember first time we saw Benjamin Morrison, first time I saw Jalen Smith. Now, that wasn't as Jalen's freshman year. I had actually come back. I didn't cover Jalen's freshman year. I was coaching. But I remember in 2014 when I came back, and I'm like, that dude just looks different. Now, interestingly, I had seen high school film of Jalen because we recruited the area of Fort Wayne when I was coaching at Defiance. So I'd seen film of him, but you just watch him in person. You're just like, this cat's different. You look at Kyle Hamilton first. And Vince, remember the first time you saw Joe Alt?
Mm-hmm.
They were just going through stretch. And Vince looks over at me and he's like, who's that guy? And I was like, that's Joe Alt, freshman offensive mind. He goes, he moves different than all those other guys.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's a different cat.
He wasn't running around like a lineman. Like he just was a little lighter on his feet.
Yeah,
like athletic.
And what was cool about today's practice is there was 2 cats that we saw that are new. There's already some on the team, Leonard Moore, Jalen Sneed, and there's a list of guys that are already on the team, which is partly why I think this team is so talented, because there's so many more of those guys that pop. You got to understand, like, I played my first career high school pass got picked off by Dre Bly. I played against Plexico Burris. I watched Ronald Curry and Michael Vick were a year behind me in the same area. I've seen dudes. I know what dudes look like. I've been to Army All-American games. I've covered Notre Dame. You see a dude, you kind of know. It's like the it thing. When you see a guy, you just like, that guy's just different. Stephon Tuitt. Saw him. He's different. There was 2 guys in the freshman class that are already practicing that you watch move around, and you're just like, that's different. Kingston was that guy last year. You watch Madden Faramo and Jadon Blair move around, you're just like, these cats are different.
Yep.
These cats aren't like everybody else. There's just something up. I don't know if Jadon Blair probably doesn't have a clue about anything in the defense yet. Madden probably doesn't know it.
Well, that's why they've got him up in a blue shirt running offense, like wide receiver.
Which I heard something interesting today about why they're doing that, and I think it's brilliant, because if he's running scout team receiver, who's he with every single day? First team defense.
Yep.
Right? And who's he hearing the coaching from, and who's he having to learn? This is why we're doing this and things like that. So I thought that was great, but you just watch those 2 kids move around, and you watch the way they look, and you're just like, that's something that's different. And it was really nice seeing those. I'm pointing out to Vince. I'm like, dude, watch number 0, because Madden's wearing the jersey number of Dom DeLuca. So if that tells you already what Notre Dame thinks of him, they've already got Madden lining up as one of their starting linebackers on the scout team. If that tells you the kind of impact Madden Faramo has already made at Notre Dame. So that was kind of fun to watch, man, is you watch those kids move around, and you're just like, these are different cats than what we're used to seeing, which is gets you really excited. And you start thinking about, like, there's just a lot more of those at Notre Dame, Vince, than there used to be. 5 years ago, you'd have some. There's just so many more of them. Like, you think about that 2015 team, and they had like Jalen Smith and Will Fuller, and they had a couple dudes like that. But this team is just kind of way more of them top to bottom.
Yeah.
And boy, tell you what, man. Whew.
There was a reason Marcus Freeman was hanging out by the linebackers during drill work. Just going to throw that out there because coaches love new toys, especially when they first show up. You know what I mean? And, he knows his team intimately. Like, he knows these guys, every one of them individually. These new guys have been there for a week, and he knows he wants to get to know these new guys. So, like, there's a reason he was hanging out down by the linebackers today. And there's a reason that he grabbed a bag and was part of the drill work with the linebackers. You know what I mean? Like, first of all, that's his comfort zone.
Attention to Madden Faramo.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say, first, that's his comfort zone. He's a linebackers coach. But Madden Faremo was down there doing some.
Well, it's funny because he's wearing a shirt that like you knew where Marcus Freeman was
correct
all the time because he's wearing this shirt that it's a play like a champion shirt, so it's
right.
the color of the shirt. And Marcus Freeman is still a pretty jacked up guy, so when he's got a bright shirt on, you're like you see it stands out. And you saw him down there, and you know, it's he was like, yeah, you can tell he spent a little extra time down there, but also coaching him up because Al Golden and Max Bulla got to focus on coaching up Drake Bowen and Jack Kaiser
100%.
and those type of guys. So you can see why he was doing it. But you start thinking about the linebacking core next year, and you're just like Drake Bowen, Jaden Osbury, Jalen Sneed, who's really come on down the stretch. You know, Kingston, who's coming back from injury, Bodie Cahoon, Teddy Rizak, and then you're going to add Madden Faremo and Anthony Sacca, right? Who I'm not feeling great about Anthony Sacca right now because I was doing my Notre Dame Penn State series history yesterday. And so, of course, I got to talk about the 1990 game when Al Golden scored the touchdown. And I'm still a little mad at Anthony Sacca's dad, Tony Sacca, who threw that gorgeous pass for that touchdown that ended another chance for Notre Dame to win the title. So I'm sorry, Anthony Sacca. I'm a little upset with you right now. It's all your dad's fault. So I'm still traumatized from that loss. But gorgeous ball he threw in that game. He had a great game against Notre Dame that day, being a little sarcastic here. But it is interesting with all those Penn State ties. We'll get into a little bit here. But those are just some initial takeaways from what we saw in practice today. Not going to gather a lot in 3 periods, but that's why we focus kind of, healthy guys, are they moving around? And then you start looking at the young bucks. Ethan Long is an athletic kid. You can tell he's going to need a lot of time in the weight room and a lot of work in the weight room.
Yep.
And, you know, Blake Hebert spins it really nicely. He's just going to need some time, you know, develop the technique. But
if they get his lower body working, he's going to be he's
got a really
help
quick,
him out a lot.
Compact throwing motion. He does very quick, compact throwing motion.
You know, when you don't use your lower half, it's just like being a pitcher, right? Your power comes from your lower half, right? And you know this. You were a pitcher, you were a quarterback. Your power comes from your lower half, and so if they can get his lower half working, like he doesn't step at all when he throws. It's all upper body. It's all arm. And so what worries me about that, and I'm not saying specifically to him, you know, that I'm worried about him, but like once they get into spring and you're throwing a lot of balls and, you know, you're putting a lot of pressure on that arm, you need to be using your lower half. Otherwise, you're going to get some pretty serious fatigue, to be honest with you. So he's going to have to work on that. But look, they didn't bring him in to start as a freshman. You know, like he's a project like that. And he's a project.
He knew he wasn't going to play right away too, which is what I love about the kid. You know, he knows what he's going to be battling.
Right. Exactly. So let's give an update on Flanigan, Cooper Flanigan. We heard in the press conference yesterday that he is out for the remainder of the playoff. Obviously, that's 2 weeks, but he's out for the remainder of the playoff with an injury. You know, how does that affect Notre Dame? You know, that kind of a deal.
It's a disappointing injury because, you know, Trev, you and I talked about this last week. Tight end blocking has been a bit of a problem for Notre Dame at times. There's been a couple games here and there where they've blocked really well. I'm trying to remember, what was the game late in the year, Trev, where they blocked really well? Was it the Army game?
Yeah.
Where they had a great game blocking, and you're just like, hopefully this is a sign of things to come. And then it was kind of like, it's just been a lot like this. But Cooper Flanigan's been definitely their best blocker, especially in the run game. I mean, you look at the 98-yard touchdown run against Indiana. We all talk about the great block Anthony Knapp had, and he had a great block. He dominated Mikael Kamara on that play. But Cooper Flanigan took a linebacker from Indiana and just drove him outside and helped open up the outside part of that run lane. Because the run lane's got to have, hey, guys, you ever been driving, bowling lane? It has 2 lanes, right? Same thing with the car, right? There's 2. There's this side and there's that side, right? It goes both ways. You got to secure the inside part of the running lane and the outside part of the running lane. Anthony Knapp dominated, open up the inside. Cooper Flanigan dominated, open up the outside. And then, boom, 98-yard touchdown, basically untouched against the number 1 ranked run defense in college football. That's going to be a loss, especially against this Penn State team that's really good off the edge. So it's just yet another kind of here we go kind of thing. Now, is this a reason like they're going to lose the game because they don't have Cooper Flanigan? I'm not saying that. It's next man in. Just like, I mean, if you can beat Georgia without Riley Mills and Benjamin Morrison, you can beat Penn State without Cooper Flanigan. But I also don't want to disrespect Cooper Flanigan by saying, no big deal. They'll be fine. He wasn't that good anyway. He was a very important part of what they did in the run game. and not having him, this is like almost zero impact on the pass game. I mean, he's had a couple like little pop passes here and there, but you're not going to miss anything in the pass game based on how they used him. Not that he can't be a good pass catcher. It's just basically how they used him. But in the run game, this certainly hurts. And Mitchell Evans has been very inconsistent as a blocker. Eli Raridan has been very up and down. He has never been as dominant this year as he was as a freshman before he got injured as a run blocker.
Yeah.
He needs to get back to that. They both have to be on top of their game in the run game this week against Penn State, who's the best part of their defense, if not their entire team outside of tight end. And if you're going to talk about like an entire unit, you can even throw it in there with tight end as the most dominant part of their team is the edge with, obviously Abdul Carter and is it Dennis Sutton? Is that how people pronounce it? Dennis Sutton.
Yeah.
And then the Vanover kid's a good football player as well. Max Granville came in the game, kid from Texas at Notre Dame, recruited for a little bit. So they got some good edge players, some really good edge players. Abdul Carter is going to be probably a top 10 NFL draft pick, if maybe top 15 or 20, but I haven't followed it too close. But first round is what I keep hearing. He's an electric pass rusher. He's the best speed rusher that Notre Dame is going to face this year. And the injury he has is not to his legs. So if he plays, he's still going to be fast. So losing a guy like Cooper Flanigan certainly hurts. So now it's next man in, right? So the replacement is simply, hey, Mitchell Evans, hey, Eli Raridan, you got to step up. I mean, that's the answer, right? I mean, that's going to be the answers. Those guys got to step up.
Let me just throw in a fly in the ointment on this. Could you see them
goal line short yardage?
Well, no, I was just going to say something along the line, like in a short yardage, like to say they wanted to go 13 personnel, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you see like a Charles Jagasaw coming in as a 6?
And that's why I knew you were going. That's why I was smiling. I knew you were going to go there. I would.
Yeah, I would too.
I would. Yeah, I mean, if you're at the 2-yard line and it's just about big boys against big boys, you're not hiding anything.
Yeah,
they all know what you're doing anyway. I mean,
right.
And here's the thing: you can still line him up there and still throw a pop pass to Mitchell Evans or Eli Raridan or Jaden Thomas. You know what 100%. I mean? Like, and if anything, having him in the game might make them more thoughtful of, hey, they're running the football here. You know what I mean? So,
sure.
When I put their 6'7", 330-pound, 5-star talent would have been a stud left tackle guy in the game and short yardage as long as he's healthy. Yeah, I'd probably go there, Vince.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
I mean, they've got depth at the offensive line, right?
I mean, the thing is, he's got to be good to go.
For
right?
sure.
He's got to be assignment correct in practice, and you got to feel comfortable. Like, hey, we're not putting this kid in there, and he's not ready yet. His legs aren't, he's got his legs underneath him. It would have to be all that stuff. If you feel, your training staff, and I would imagine since he was working, Vince, you were down there on the field on Saturday. He was working with the number 2s at right guard.
Yep.
And he's now on the depth chart as the number 2 right guard.
And I watched him during warm-ups today with the way he was warming up and everything. He looks good to me, right? And we don't get to see full padded practice and all that kind of stuff and, live. But, he didn't look affected, I would say. So, and
I do believe, I could be wrong, but I do believe, I'm checking I do believe he played on PAT field goal against Georgia. Let me go look here real quick. Yeah, he played 5 snaps on PAT field goal against Georgia. So if his legs weren't underneath him, they're not going to put him in PAT field goal.
Right.
So,
right, exactly.
Yeah, short yardage, 3rd and 1 at the 40, 4th and 1, goal line, red zone, and I need to move somebody. Yeah. I would even consider, y'all might not think this is a smart idea. I would actually consider putting Emil Wagner tight end in that situation and sliding Charles inside and put him and Rocco right beside each other.
Yeah.
And then let Emil block the edge. I mean, for him, it's the same thing he would do if he was on an open side but that's what I would consider doing. So yeah, I would do that. But again, Vince, big picture though, in other base situations, it's Mitchell and Eli got to step up and play. But I don't think this is a thing where Davis Sherwood's going to play more or Jack Larson's going to play more, anything like that. This is more of you're just going to roll with these 2.
Now you got 12 personnel. Yeah, right.
Right. And then they got to go. So you're just rotating 2 guys through 12 personnel and they got to go. But I do think where I could see something different personnel-wise, as to your point, which I think is a good one, in those short yardage situations, I would have no problem. Like we saw in 2021, I would have, remember when they put, was it number 42 or 45?
Yep.
On Joe, what number
Joe
they put Joe Walt on? Was it 42 or 45? Do you remember what it was?
One of the 2. I want to say it was 45. But I don't know how you would see that or look for that. But
I would do that. I would certainly do that. Yeah,
I would
that'd be
too.
something I would do.
I would definitely do that, especially in a run situation. Yeah, short yard.
I'm actually going to look this
100%.
up now, Vince, because it's going to bother me. I'm actually going to look
I
up
think
the
it was
games he played.
45. I think it was 45. That's what I'm going with. Come on, lucky numbers.
I'm going to look that up. I'm going to look that up. So I'm going to look up the Purdue game in 2021.
Look at you,
because he played 6 snaps in that game, and it was as a tight end. So I'm going to go ahead and look that bad boy up. So anyway, you may continue, my friend.
Okay, sounds good. So let's talk about, kind of what's at stake here, and that seems obvious at this point because it's the Final Four, it's the semifinals, but big picture for Notre Dame. You and I were actually having this conversation earlier today as we were out running errands for our wives, and big picture for Notre Dame. I mean, looking all the way back to the beginning of the season and what we thought this season was going to be, and all of those things. If what is the big picture? Trevor, I'm going to throw this to you, man. I'm going to let you kick this off. What's the big picture for Notre Dame being in the semifinal against Penn State, with a chance to go to the championship?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I've thought a lot about this because there's a little bit floating around there that like Notre Dame is playing with a little bit of house money, and there's a little bit of truth to that. There is.
I've said that.
Yeah, because nobody.
I've said that.
Yeah, and it's there's definitely truth to that because nobody expected them to beat Georgia, right? Like I mean, I don't care what the spread said, and like, I'm talking national narrative. I know we predicted Notre Dame to beat Georgia, but it's per national narrative. It's the SEC champs. Notre Dame hasn't won a New Year's Six bowl in 30 years. Like that, the expectation was to not beat Georgia by double digits in advance to the semifinals, right? And so when you add in what they were able to do with the lack of personnel that they had, I think now it's just people put it in the chat all the time is why not Notre Dame? Why not go all the way? Because now what Notre Dame has to do big picture is they have the ability to do what Georgia couldn't and shut the door on a team that's looking for that signature win. I don't want to discredit what Penn State's done up to this point this season, but SMU and Boise State aren't to the caliber of beating Georgia, right? I think I said it in a show. It might have been the post game, honestly, but talked about how it was interesting that Ohio State and Notre Dame kind of got their signature wins out of the way this year. Like Ohio State dominated Tennessee, but Dylan Sampson pulled his hamstring. He finished the game with like 2 carries. There wasn't a whole lot of hype around Tennessee going into that game, even though I predicted them to win.
But it was not about, and to stick up for you here, your thing was not about you thought Tennessee was better than Ohio State. You were afraid that Ohio State was going to go in the tank mentally because of just losing to Michigan. It was not about, hey, I like the matchups here. It was more about, I don't think Ohio State's going to handle this well. And that's why you picked Tennessee. So just a little bit of a sticking up for you there situation. It wasn't that you were like, I've broken the film down and I think Tennessee's the better football team.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, everything on paper pointed to the direction of Ohio State. I just trusting Ryan Day, trusting Will Howard, a lot of question marks there. And, but then Ohio State came back and in a resounding fashion dominated Oregon. Notre Dame got their signature win. Now you have 2 teams in the semifinals in Texas and Penn State who are now looking for their version of what Ohio State got over Oregon and what Notre Dame got over Georgia. So, I mean, big picture for Notre Dame, it's to continue. I mean, they have the opportunity to go from not having a New Year's Six win in 30 years to getting 2 in 1 season. That's a crazy thought, at the end of the day. So, for me, that's when I look at Notre Dame big picture, because it was tough for me to really dive into, program defining, narrative changing win because they got that last week. They beat the team that not a lot of people thought they were going to because it's the SEC and the SEC champion, and those are the games that Notre Dame doesn't win. So, they are playing with a little bit of house money, but they have a great opportunity to keep the ball rolling and move on and play an opponent that is now looking for their signature win. So that's where I'm kind of at with it.
Just so we're clear, here's what I mean by house money when I talk about this. When you look at, and Vince, you and I were talking about this today when we were running around doing errands today, is with what this team has suffered through, it's kind of like they've reached the point already where you say they moved the needle. to your point, Trevor, like because they beat Georgia, because they had that narrative changing win, and no matter how much people try to spin this as, well, this isn't your best Georgia team. Yeah, I know exactly. Notre Dame was better than Georgia, like just flat out better than Georgia. You can spin it however you want to spin it, but they're better than Georgia. They're in a better place right now than Georgia. It's more so, this is kind of like everything after this is just like gravy. It doesn't mean that I don't think they're capable of beating everyone else. I think every team left in the playoff, for the most part, can beat anybody else in the playoff. I'd put probably Penn State at the bottom of that list, but Penn State didn't just get here because they played two bad football teams. They beat two good football teams to get here. Are they as good as Georgia? No, but that doesn't mean that they're not good football teams that they had to earn their way. I mean, I don't think there's a whole giant difference between Boise State and Arizona State, if I'm going to be completely honest with you. I don't think there's a big difference between SMU and Arizona State. And honestly, if those two teams played, I think SMU would beat Arizona State. I watched Arizona State take Texas to overtime, and I watched Penn State smack SMU. And even though the Boise game was a lot closer than the final score, Penn State led that entire game, right? I mean, they were the better team. It was more like Notre Dame Louisville than it was, them having to come back and barely hold on and then pull away type of thing. But that was a competitive game against a good football team, right? So that's where I'm coming from, is like, you've already moved the needle, and it would be unfair for me to say I now demand that you win the next one or the next two, or I'm going to say you didn't achieve what you needed to achieve this season. It doesn't mean that they're done. It doesn't mean I don't think they can beat anybody left in the schedule. It's just kind of like, you've already moved the narrative. Anything after that is just kind of gravy. It's like, I was telling you guys about my time hitting, had 10 on red 7, and I hit it 3 times in a row. You know what I'm saying? Like, I took all the $100 chips they gave me, put them in my pocket, and I'm playing with whatever's left on the table because I got this $1,000 in my pocket. I'm going home with $1,000. You know what I mean? At least $1,000, because I paid $350 each one. Hit it 3 times, 3 out of 4 rolls. Right? So my point is not that they can't do it. It's simply that at this point in time, you've moved the narrative. Now it's just like, let's sit back and have some fun. And if anything, I think that kind of takes some of the pressure off of Notre Dame. It's like, we've already done what people don't think we can do, so why stop now? You know what I mean? So that's what I'm referring to when I say they're playing it with house money at this point in time.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Is that right there?
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I mean, I think again, the way I look at it is, big picture, right? We're looking at the season as a whole, as what we were predicting at the beginning of the season. What would be because we were asked this all the time, right? What's a successful season in 2024, right? And I think everybody was like, hey, you got to make the playoffs. You win that home game, then, it's good. Now you're playing with house money. I think
we didn't say that before the season, though. You and I
thought that I wanted 2.
We said, yeah, win plus, you had to win 1.
Yeah, right.
And then depending on who you played in round 2, you had to win 2.
Right. Yep. I was win 2. Yeah. That's where I was. And so that's where Notre Dame is right now. And as disappointed as I would be because of the draw of Penn State for the Final Four game. And I think Notre Dame has an advantage, better team than Penn State. And that absolutely. But you can't be guaranteed that draw, obviously, in August when we're having this conversation to begin with, right? And so where I sit now on January 5th, I'm like, Notre Dame's got to win this game, right? But if you take a step back and you're looking at the season as a whole, the needle's been moved. Like
that's what I'm referring to.
This is a progressed situation for Notre Dame. Marcus Freeman has been better every single year that he has been a head coach.
Right.
And I think, and that's what you have to look at. Right. And look, we're not trying to set people up for, some sort of failure on Thursday. That's not what we're saying.
Not at all. Not at all.
Okay.
Right. Because we're going to talk micro next. We're going to talk micro next.
Correct.
And that's different than the macro. The macro is you have moved the needle in the perception of your program. It has been done. The only thing that can move it further is to win the whole dang thing.
Correct. Yeah,
right?
No, absolutely.
Like Trevor said, beating Penn State doesn't prove something that you didn't already prove when you beat Georgia.
Correct. Oh, I agree with that. I mean,
that's third best team in this is what that's the third best. The spinsters are going to say this. What's the third best team in the Big Ten? Like, they lost to Ohio State. They lost to Oregon. You didn't beat the best team in the Big Ten. You didn't accomplish anything. That's what it'll be.
Of course.
Right. That's what the narrative, like, so my point is, like, they're like, well, we weren't impressed by you beating Georgia, but we're definitely impressed by you beating Penn State. Like that won't be the narrative. That's the point.
Never gonna happen.
The only thing that can move the needle any further is to win the whole dang thing.
Correct.
To quote the great Jake Taylor. You know what I'm saying? There's nothing left but to win the whole thing. You know what I mean? For all you old heads, Trev, do you know what that reference is from, my friend? You're going to get so many brownie points if you know what that reference is from.
I would be lying to you if I said that I did. I'm sorry.
Major League. It's okay.
Major League,
I'm sorry.
baby.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
It's okay.
Have you ever seen Major League?
I have. I have not seen it. Yeah.
Enough to quote.
Because if he hadn't seen
Yeah,
Major League,
fair.
Vince, we're like, all right, so Vince and I are going to be handling the rest of the show now. So. But like you get so like that's the macro, that's the big picture conversation that we talked about. I think the other kind of big picture thing too, guys, is Marcus Freeman has been destroying narratives all season, and I do think there is some more narrative destroying things that are left. And from a big picture standpoint, like last week, it was okay. You haven't won a New Year's Six bowl, a major bowl, since the end of the 1993 season when you beat Texas A&M in the Cotton Bowl. Well, Notre Dame has played now 3 straight games, postseason games in the Orange Bowl where they've lost. 2 of them were actual Orange Bowl games. Since their last win in an Orange Bowl was on January 1st of 1990. It was Tony Rice's last game at Notre Dame. They beat number 1 Colorado 21-6 in that game. Rocket went off in that game. Defense was phenomenal in that game because that Colorado offense was legit. And Eric Bieniemy was their running back. Like, that's how long ago that was, right? And the next year they played Colorado again. You had the phantom block in the back. I think it was a phantom block in the back. I guess I shouldn't say phantom because I know why they called it. I just don't think they should have called it. Rocket returns a punt. Should have been the game winner. They throw the flag. Notre Dame loses to Colorado 10-9. They then played in that game again at the end of the 94 season, so January 1 of 95. They lost to Florida State. And then they played in that stadium again in 2012 at the end of the 2012 season in the BCS national title game. It wasn't the Orange Bowl, but it was played where the Orange Bowls played.
Yeah, it was the national
and
championship
they lost that game. And then, of course, last time they played in that stadium was 2017 against Miami. And we know what happened there. So, you had your last time you played in the Sugar Bowl, I think you got smacked, right? Was 2007 at the end of the 2006 season by LSU, right? So you haven't had, good vibes there. You haven't won a New Year's Six game since whenever. You haven't beaten Georgia ever. So I think this is kind of like narrative busting season, and this is another opportunity to kind of change the sort of the trajectory of the program by saying, okay, first Notre Dame won 2 of their first 3 Orange Bowl bursts. They lost the first one in 1971 at the end of the 71 season. It was actually in the 72 season. They lost to Nebraska, and then they won their next 2. They beat Bama the next year, the end of the 73 season. In the Orange Bowl, and then we remember at the end of the 89 season they beat Colorado, and then they've lost 3 straight postseason games in that stadium. So this is another opportunity to kind of narrative bust, right? And get rid of it. Well, they haven't done this since such and such time. They haven't done this in such and such time. They haven't beat this team in such and such time. And then, of course, big picture, you're tied 9-1 against Penn State. Chance to take the series lead in there, which we'll get a little bit more into here next. But so I think big picture, there's still some of that left as well, Trev.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, kind of switching over to like the micro view and what's at stake more initially, right? Talking about narratives outside of just big picture, Notre Dame as a program, needle moving, defining wins. You have what's at stake right in front of you, and there's a lot of questions around. Well, how's Notre Dame going to stop Georgia without Riley Mills? And then they were able to overcome that narrative. And now another one, Penn State has this 2-day head start that everybody's been talking about how, Notre Dame had to have their game postponed after that unfortunate tragedy down in New Orleans. And Penn State would have already had this, day head start because they played on New Year's Eve, not New Year's Day. So all of these different things are another opportunity short term now to overcome that narrative, like about this team specifically. You know what I mean? And obviously, Brian, you said it best. The next needle moving thing is going to be winning the whole thing, right? Like that's going to be the next thing. And look, I mean, this is no disrespect to Penn State, but it's not, Notre Dame's not going to start getting their flowers if they didn't get them from people after beating Georgia. they're not going to get them from beating Penn State, right? Like that's
right.
just
There's going to be some spin. There's
Right.
one thing that they can do this year to make people say, okay, I'm going to stop saying I like this Notre Dame team, but like I hear that. I've heard that a million times to Georgia. Hey, I really like this Notre Dame team, but this isn't your typical Georgia team. And they didn't have Carson Beck. And but this, but that, but they only threw for 90 yards. But they did blah, 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 blah. All these buts. There's only one thing you're going to do to shut all that up. It's beat Ohio State or Texas in the championship.
Got to win it all.
To Trev's point, it's not be, and this isn't a shot at Penn State, because if Penn State beats Notre Dame, it's going to be sort of the similar type of storyline for them. Well,
Right.
Notre Dame can't throw the ball, and you know what I mean.
Right.
You've got to do the whole thing, and
that's when the injury narrative is going to come into play for Notre Dame if they lose.
Right.
Like that's when people who haven't been on the Notre Dame train and who aren't willing to look at what Notre Dame's injuries were against Georgia, if Penn State then beats them, if Penn State beats Notre Dame, it'll be cool. You beat a team without both, defensive tackles, both edge rushers, without Ben Morrison, without their left tackle, without their. That's when that will come into play, because there's always going to be that thing, right?
There's going to be those haters, right?
Right.
Oh, because they want certain teams to win, and Penn State's not that sexy team that gets them all excited either, just like Notre Dame is not. So there's no question, man. On a micro standpoint, I mean, forget all what the narrative says, what all this stuff. Obviously, the other part of the micro standpoint is you still have an opportunity to win a championship, right? Like, so we talked about big picture. What does this mean about the direction of the program? That's already been done. But now it's like, okay, but let's make a real definitive statement. And that's the real micro thing that's available in this game, Trev, is you have an opportunity to make a giant statement that no, we're not just happy beating Georgia. Beating Georgia wasn't on our okay, here's our top 5 for the goals for the season. Okay. We want to do this, and this, and then beat Georgia and then call it a day and just say, hey guys, right? So, I mean, it's not like the Notre Dame team is saying what I'm saying, like, hey, listen, they've already moved the narrative, guys. We've already beat Georgia. We've moved the narrative. We're good now. We can just chill out and just enjoy South Beach. And, no, they're still a team on a mission. And if you were to ask the coaches and players, hey, Driscoll said this, they'd be like, he doesn't know what the heck he's talking about. Like, we're not screw beating Georgia. We're Notre Dame. And that's exactly the mentality they should have. And that's what's in front of them, and they should embrace that, because they can compete with and beat anybody left on their schedule, just like teams can beat them. This is a thing where I know that Ohio State's like the trendy pick, and I'm not even pushing back on that. I'm not at all, because they have been the best team in the postseason so far. I don't think that's debatable. They've been the most impressive team in the playoffs so far. I think it's them 1, Penn State 2, Notre Dame 3 in regard to margin of victory. I would add Notre Dame ahead of Penn State if you're talking about the quality of the wins, right? But if you're just talking about like margin of victory, dominance over your opponent, Penn State would be 2 behind Ohio State. But again, I don't think they have the margin of victory if they had to play Indiana and Georgia in their first 2 games. So to me, that's kind of the reason I look at this. And again, Notre Dame's favored for a reason, because they're a better team than Penn State. Is it by a ton? No. Like when we said during the year that we thought Notre Dame was better than Penn State, should have been ranked ahead of Penn State. I still believe that. I believe that to be true then. I believe that to be true now. But we also said Penn State's still a top 10 to 15-ish caliber team, no question. And they're playing really good football coming down the stretch also. And even their loss to Oregon was a really good football game. Like they showed me some things they hadn't shown before, but Notre Dame is still the better team. And that's why it started off as a 1.5 point spread. And I believe it quickly rose up to 2. So the micro standpoint is all your ultimate goals are still right in front of you. I mean, they're still right there.
Because the goal is always to win a championship. Right. I mean, always.
Yeah.
The goal isn't to get to the Final Four. Like that's definitely not the goal.
Not for Notre Dame.
Yeah, not for the
now,
team.
that doesn't mean we won't look back and view this season as a giant success if that's where it ends. But that's not the goal at Notre Dame. That's not the standard at Notre Dame. The standard at Notre Dame is to win a championship. That's the expectation. It's like that great scene for Miracle, where Herb Brooks is giving Kurt Russell, but he's playing Herb Brooks, gives that speech at the end where he says, like, this is your time, basically, right? And he says, take it. Now go out and take it. The Russians are the best team in the world, but not this night, not tonight. Tonight we skate with them. Tonight we beat them. You know, and he talks about that, and it's like even now, like Vince, I'm literally getting goosebumps. You know what I mean? And you know, thinking of that moment, right? So it's really I'm actually listening to to it now just to remind myself of what he said.
Of course
it's really he says their time is done. It's over. Tired of hearing about what a great team, you know what I mean? And then this is your time. I freaking love this. Now go out there and take it. Right? Like that's it. That's the deal. I'm tired of hearing about how great Ohio State is. I'm tired of hearing how great how Texas is and how of a genius this guy is. And I'm tired of hearing about how great Penn State's defense is. Vince showed me a text today of some dude, some football analyst who ranked the top 4 defenses in the playoff, and he had Notre Dame number 4. I'm like, they're not even the 4th defense in all of college football. And you're gonna say they're the 4th? Like I'm sick of all this crap. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of this disrespect. I'm sick of listening to this clown, you know, that does the show with my guy Joe DeLeon. I'm not even want to speak this clown's name. Well, no, they still don't have the athletes. You're an idiot at this point in time. If you keep saying like they're winning in spite of their lack of athleticism, like you're watching something completely different, or you don't know what you're watching. But I'm tired of that narrative. And so it's like Herb Brooks said, is like, this is your opportunity. I'm tired of hearing about Ohio State. I'm tired of hearing about Texas. I'm tired of Penn State every year being overrated. This is your time. This is your opportunity. Take it. That's what's at scale on the micro standpoint for this Notre Dame football team. This is your time. Seize it. And man, I'm looking forward to this game on Thursday.
And there it is. So that's the big picture. That's the micro. That's the macro. Everything going on into this game. And now we're going to jump into this a little bit more specifically. But before we do, make sure you hit that like button, that subscribe button, that notification bell, share with your family and friends. And of course, jump on the boards at irishbreakdown.com. All kinds of good stuff happening over on the board. So you definitely want to check that out. And there's going to be more stuff coming every single day, breaking down this matchup, breaking down the matchup that was. And then hey, this train just keeps moving forward. So you want to make sure you jump on the boards at irishbreakdown.com. All right, boys, let's jump into Penn State a little bit more specifically, and we'll start off by kind of, you know, for those of you that aren't super familiar with Penn State and, you know, what this looks like and, you know, who they are, you know, going into the 24 season and what they've done in the 24 season and as well as the series history with Notre Dame. And so we're going to kind of just jump into who Penn State is, you know, what their season has been, you know, all of that kind of a thing. So first, I'm going to throw this one to Trevor. Why don't you bring us up to speed on the series history with Penn State?
Yeah, Brian brought it up last time, and Notre Dame has the opportunity.
27-year-old who was like 9 the last time these two teams played.
He's very convinced that Trevor can read.
For you, Trev.
So.
Vince trying to set you up, man. That's what he's doing right now.
Try to help out.
I appreciate it.
He told me he knows how to work a VCR, so I figure he knows how to.
He did
listen,
brag
man.
About that. He did brag.
I did, man. I can't wait till I'm.
Wasn't everything. He was rolling, man.
I cannot wait until I'm doing one of these shows in 20 years when I can talk about the 2024 season and not be like,
when cars didn't even fly.
But yeah, we're gonna hire somebody else new, and I'd be like, I bet you didn't. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Tell me what Bluetooth is. So look, Notre Dame and Penn State all time in their series, they're 9-9-1, right? So it's tied. Brian brought that up earlier in the show. And the last time they played was 2007 in Happy Valley. And that was a rough game. I believe that was the second game of the 07 season after they lost to Georgia Tech in a rough way. I mean, that was a completely rebuilt Notre Dame team. That was Charlie Weiss's first year where he had to go through a big roster turnover and start developing really young players. I believe, was that Jimmy Clausen's first start?
His first start, because he didn't start against Georgia Tech.
Yeah. Anderson did, right, against Georgia Tech.
Demetrius Jones.
Demetrius Jones.
Right.
Yeah. And so that game was in Happy Valley. To Brian's point, I don't remember a whole lot about the game. I remember Darren Wall's pick six.
They
And then
competed, but they
yeah.
were just outclassed. That was a decent top 15-ish type of Penn State team. They were just outclassed.
Yep. And then the only other game, to be honest, and after this, I'll kick it to Brian, because that is when my knowledge of the Penn State games kind of end, is the 06 game when they played in South Bend. And I remember it was one of like Joe Paterno. He was being highlighted in that game. It was his like 100th or something game or something like that. And then I know Notre Dame won. And like I said, that was the end of my knowledge of Penn State series history. But Notre Dame has the opportunity to take the lead in the series in the Orange Bowl. And they've been sticking with this narrative of, and I know we're going to dive into this a little bit in the season review, but Penn State for the last, 7-8 years has kind of been that team that beats the team that they're supposed to, but they fall short to the teams that it's questionable if they beat, right? There's all those graphics all the time about what James Franklin's record is against AP top 10, AP top 5. And so for them, like I brought up at the start of the show, this is an opportunity for them to get there, or at least for James Franklin, his program defining win for Penn State. But as far as series history goes, fellas, that's where my knowledge ends.
That was a fun game. I remember that. They had a great linebacking core. Paul Posluszny. You had Dan Connor. I think Sean Lee, I believe, was on that linebacking core as well. And I just remember one of the highlights of that game was Brady dropping a dime up the seam over top of Posluszny into John Carlson's hands. Darius Walker had a really good game. Before that, the last time that they met was 1992. That was the great Snow Bowl. I broke that one down. Penn State took a lead late in the game. A little fullback dive for a 13-yard touchdown to take the lead. They ran a screen pass to Jerome Bettis to set it up. Notre Dame gets down inside the 10. The drive stalls. And on fourth down, hit a little angle route out of the backfield to Jerome Bettis over the middle. And then Rick Meyer drops back. They went for 2. Because remember back then, if you kick the extra point and basically game's over and it's a tie, right? And game ends with a tie. And I think that would have been Notre Dame's second tie that season, because I think they also tied Michigan that year. I could be wrong about that one. But so they went for 2. Rick Meyer looks left. Nobody open. He starts to scramble, like move right, slides right. Didn't scramble right. Slides right. And sees Reggie Brooks, throws it into the corner of the end zone. Reggie makes a jump and catch, brings it down for the 2-point conversion, and Notre Dame wins it. Yes, they did tie Michigan that season. And that's the infamous Snow Bowl. And then obviously Penn State won in 91. They also won in 1990. That 1990 game was the one where Notre Dame jumped out to a 21-7 lead. Penn State came back, and Al Golden's touchdown actually tied the game. It didn't win the game. They needed a field goal after that to win the game. And here's a funny little nugget, as I mentioned before. Anthony Sacca's dad was the quarterback on the 1990 team, and his uncle was a quarterback after his dad. And then the quarterback that took over for him in the Notre Dame game in 1992 was actually Kerry Collins, who went 7 of 28 in that game. But yeah, his uncle and dad both played quarterback at Penn State. So Tony Sacca was the quarterback against Notre Dame in 89 and 90, I believe. And I think his uncle John, I think, was the quarterback for Penn State in 91. I think some of you older cats like me might remember that. But yeah, Al Golden caught that because he was a tight end, caught the touchdown that tied that game. And that, I think, kept Notre Dame from winning a championship. And I really truly believe that, because I think that 1990 team, I think that 1990 team might have won it all, because they had climbed all the way back up. So if you remember that 1990 season, Notre Dame had lost a game early in the year, I believe, to Michigan. Second game of the year, that was the game. No, that was 91. I think it was it Stanford? Hold on, let me look this up real quick. Yeah, they beat Michigan, who was number 4, beat Michigan State, who was 24. Then they lost to a really bad Stanford team in 90. Then they kept rolling. They beat Air Force bad. They beat number 2 Miami. That's the game Rocket returned to kick for a touchdown. And then they were coming off of a November 10th road win over number 9 Tennessee, and Notre Dame had moved back up to number 1, and they had USC coming up the next week, who Lou Holtz had dominated in his tenure. So if they win that game, then when they play Colorado in the Orange Bowl, it's number 1 versus number 2. Notre Dame number 1, Colorado number 2. So Penn State kept that Notre Dame team from having an opportunity to win another championship under Lou Holtz. And so very interesting time. Penn State gave Notre Dame a lot of problems back then. Notre Dame won in 89 convincingly at Penn State. They won in 1988 convincingly. Penn State won in 87, 86, 85. Notre Dame in 84. Penn State won in 83, 82, 81. That 81 to 87 was also the glory years of Penn State. That's when Joe Paterno won both of his national titles. I think it was 80. Was it 82 and 86? I think is when he won his two. 86 is when they beat Miami in that giant upset when Vinny Testaverde threw, I think it was 419 interceptions. I might be off by a couple, but it was a lot. He threw a lot of picks in that game. I'm trying to remember what my buddy Jason's listening. Do you remember which of those teams Gattuso was on? So let me go look up old Joe Pa. I thought it was 82 and 86, but it might be he's saying it was 84 and 86. But that was their glory years. I mean, that was the best. It was 8. I was right. It was 82 and 86. See, this is why you don't challenge me on history, Jay. Come on, man. I studied under the great Loose Emoji. Okay, I'm gonna get that right. That was the glory years of Penn State. Was that 1980s period? That was it. And Notre Dame struggled with them then. And of course, Notre Dame dominated the series early. They won in 13, 26, 28. And then the only other time they've played in a bowl game was at the end of the 1976 season. Number 15 Notre Dame beat number 20 Penn State in the Gator Bowl 20-9. You guys want to hear something crazy? And when I learned this, I was floored because I remember some of those great 1980s and early 1990 games. This is the first time this will now be game number 20. This is the first time that Notre Dame and Penn State have ever played each other where they were both ranked in the top 10. They've never played each other where they were both, like Michigan and Notre Dame have a ton of games where they were both ranked in the top 10, including recently. But yeah, the closest they came was in 1991. Penn State was 8 and Notre Dame was 12. And then there was another year where Notre Dame was, Penn State was 5 and Notre Dame was 13. In 1989, Notre Dame was 1, Penn State was 17, 18 and 22. When Notre Dame beat them in 06, Notre Dame was number 4, Penn State was number 19. This is the first time these two teams have played where they were both in the top 10. I would not have guessed that. Like, I would have guessed that certainly there's had to have been times when they were both ranked, since Notre Dame was great in the 80s and early 90s. Penn State was really good in the late 80s and early 90s. But no, this is the first time they've ever played where both teams are ranked in the top 10, and it's only the second bowl game they've ever played. Notre Dame winning the first one at the end of 1976. The lead runner on that Notre Dame team, Al Hunter, by the way, had two rushing touchdowns, rushed for over 100 yards. So that's a little bit of the series history that Notre Dame can take control of if they win this football game on Saturday.
So let's jump into how Penn State got to the semifinals, to the Final Four, and what their season looks like, or looked like, I guess, leading up to it. Trevor, I'll let you lead off on this one. Give us a little rundown on Penn State's schedule and how they got here.
Overall, the thing that I do want to kind of preface with Penn State is they were able to. The graphic looks great, by the way. But the one thing that I do want to add is Penn State was one of the very few teams this college football season that was able to avoid disaster, right? They had some close calls, but they didn't have that monumental big upset that kind of changed the trajectory of what their season was going to look like, right? And I was kind of thinking about which team this kind of resembled a little bit. And honestly, it was kind of like Georgia's, right? Like they never fully hit their stride. They lost to some of the better teams that they played in the regular season, but they avoided that disaster. They didn't lose to Northern Illinois, right? They didn't lose to a 6-5 Michigan team in the final week of the season. Like they did. So they were able to avoid that, right? And so that's noteworthy. But they were also at the same time, they were never able to catch their stride, right? We talk all the time about Notre Dame's win streak, and they rattled off, X amount of games, and all of them were by double digits except for Louisville. And Penn State's was a little weird, and you guys can see it right there, right? I mean, they had a close game with Bowling Green in the same week that Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois, and the overtime win against USC. The Wisconsin game was a lot closer than what the final score indicates. It was 14-13 going into the fourth quarter, and Penn State was able to pull away late, right? They had no offensive touchdown scored against Ohio State. They had a close win at Minnesota. That one came down to the end, but then they also had big blowout wins, right? They had a really good win over Washington. They had a blowout win over Purdue and Maryland, and now they're starting to kind of hit their stride once they've gotten into the postseason a little bit. They lost to Oregon, But Brian, you brought it up earlier. Vince, all three of us have all talked about this game at one point in time. We thought if this game turns into a shootout and Oregon starts stretching its legs, they're done.
They're toast.
And they had over 500 total yards of offense, put up 37 points, had 2 running backs over 100 yards rushing, and so they showed me a little bit of something in that game, and they can compete in different types of games. And now that they've gotten into the postseason, which we alluded to earlier, they've outscored both of their playoff opponents 69-24. So they're doing a pretty good job, and they're doing what's been asked of them on the stage, at a stage where James Franklin historically doesn't have a whole lot of success. Right. So all encompassing, that's kind of where and how Penn State got here.
I'll tell you something, Trev. You look at it, you talked about the Bowling Green game, and on the face of it, you look and see, well, you guys only beat Bowling Green by 7. Well, that happened to be the same week Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois, and they were down 17-7 to Bowling Green and were getting worked, but they battled back. And that's been something that I don't think this is a great Penn State team. This is a really good Penn State. I've seen Penn State teams with more talent than this one. But what this team has shown that past teams have not is they are a much grittier team in regard to they just don't fold. They don't, if you smack them in the mouth, they're going to keep coming at you. You think of, we talked about the Bowling Green game coming back from that. You think of the USC game, they were down 20-6 at halftime and came back and won that one in overtime. And as Notre Dame fans found out, going out to the Coliseum is not an easy thing to do, right? I mean, Notre Dame never trailed that game, but USC gave them tons of problems in that game. Yes, you go on the road and you have an ugly win over Wisconsin, but that ugly win was by 15 points, and that was a hard-fought win. Yeah, the Ohio State game that's kind of typical Penn State. That's what you expect from Penn State. Get a 10-0 lead and blow it, and you get all these opportunities. You can't make those plays. But as you mentioned, Trevor, look what they did the next 2 weeks. They blew out Washington and blew out Purdue in back-to-back games. The Minnesota game, they should have lost that game. But they made the plays they needed to make on special teams, on defense to win that football game. And they've just owned Maryland. I mean, that's just not even, a deal. But this is a team that showed me a little bit more grittiness than past Penn State teams. And I got Georgia up there. I see on the thing. I forgot to change that over. But that's when I look at that football team, that's something that stood out to me, guys, is this team is a little bit more competitive in some of those moments than we've seen from Penn State. Because even in the year that James Franklin won the Big Ten championship, like he actually has a Big Ten championship, and that was in 2016. But even in that season, they got beat by Michigan 49-10. Because people are like, how did they win the Big Ten and not get to the college football playoff? They lost to Pitt, number one, which Pitt had the weirdest 2016 season. I'll talk about that here in a second. But you not only lost to Pitt, you got blown out by Michigan 49-10. Yeah, great. You beat Ohio State, but you get beat 49-10, and then you have to have this giant comeback against Wisconsin. That we've seen them do that before, but it's against teams that have lesser talent. And then they played in one of the most entertaining bowl games I've ever seen in my life, in that 2016 Rose Bowl against USC was a super fun game to play. If you're like a defensive player, you probably hate that game. You probably never watch that game again. But if you're an offensive guy like we all were, that was a fun game. Fun game. And there was Saquon Barkley, Sam Darnold, Chris Godwin, Mike Gesicki. I mean, that was a fun game to watch. But even that season, guys, they lost 49-10 to Michigan. It's like that's kind of been the thing with this Penn State team, and that's the narrative that they're trying to erase, is can you beat a team that's on your level? Yeah, they look great at beating SMU, and they look great beating Boise State, but they have a significant talent advantage over both of those teams. And that's kind of where I look at it. And I'll just say this, we're not going to do like a deep dive into recruiting, but one of the unique aspects about this matchup too, Trevor, is if you look at recruiting, they're very comparable in how these two teams are built. Also, you talk about how they got here, and that they're majority homegrown players. And so that's why there's a culture there at Penn State that I think allowed them to kind of show some of that grit in those come from behind moments that you see other teams when they fall behind like that just kind of fold. And it's not that Penn State avoids the portal. They have 3 starters from the portal. Their starting tackle, right tackle Nolan Rucci, came from Wisconsin. He transferred in from Wisconsin. Jalen Kimber transferred in from Georgia, and A.J. Harris transferred in from Alabama. And so, or also, actually, he went to Georgia? Yeah, he also went to Georgia. And they've got a couple other portal kids that are in the 2 deep, but Notre Dame starts 4 portal guys. in their starting lineup. And they have a few more portal guys in the rotation, but starting lineup, it's very similar. So they've done what Notre Dame has done and what Ohio State has primarily done, because there's all this talk about Ohio State has a bunch of transfers. No, they don't. They've got some really good transfers, and they paid a lot of money to get some of those transfers. You look at like their offensive line, they got a couple transfers. Quinshon Junkins we know about, the quarterback we know about, Caleb Downs. But you look at and Davidson, Ignosin is a transfer, but the vast majority of their starters are homegrown players. Texas is probably the team that's tapped into the portal the most of all the teams left in the championship. And so, you know, and even one of their portal guys, because technically Quinn Ewers is a portal pickup because he transferred from Ohio State.
He's been there for a while.
He came after his freshman year.
He did all of his maturing
at Texas.
Because remember,
Right.
he reclassified. So
yeah, he basically spent his senior year of high school at Ohio State.
that's what I'm saying. Yeah, that's my exact point.
So
right.
he could get $1 million. I mean, that's literally
Correct.
and he's grown up a lot since then. Cut off the mullet.
Yeah.
You know, some of the, you know, the lack of common sense went there. But like I was trying to be nice. But that's the thing about this team is they're constructed very differently. Penn State's overall average class ranking from the last 5 years, so basically 24, 23, 22, 21, and 20 classes is 14th. Notre Dame's average in those same 5-year stretches 11th. So neither of them have had consensus top 10 classes the last 5 years. If you just look at the average of where they ranked, not consensus in regard to they may be top 10 if you were to take, you know, like the consensus of everyone, the number 11 team might be number 6. Or the Notre Dame, whose average is 11th, might be number 6 or 7 because some teams are like 3rd 1 year, 57th the next year. You know, you don't know. But their average ranking is 11th. Penn State's is 14th. But it just kind of goes to show, like, number one, that's why I say don't listen to recruiting rankings. Tyler Warren was a 3-star recruit, just enough, right? Riley Leonard was a 3-star recruit. Leonard Moore's a 3-star recruit, just enough with that. But there's also a lot of highly ranked kids on their roster. They've got, I think, 3 former 5-stars on defense and, you know, or on offense. You know, Nolan Rucci was a 5-star. Nick Singleton was a 5-star. Drew Aller was a 5-star. Dennis Sutton was a 5-star. They've got some highly ranked guys. Abdul Carter wasn't even the top 200 player. You know what I mean? So it's like, but their overall construction of how they were built is very similar. And they also went out. I think the final piece for me, guys, and we talked about this, Vince, you and I talked about this summer. The one thing I said about Penn State is I don't trust James Franklin, but but I said this before the year. I've always felt Penn State was overrated, but I actually liked this Penn State team coming into the season. You can go back and listen to our Big Ten preview. And the reason why is I felt James Franklin made 2 of the best offseason hires in all of college football when he hired Andy Kotelnicki as his OC and Tom Allen as his defensive coordinator. They're both that are coordinators are new. And I think those guys and what they bring to the table gave this team a little bit more grit than they otherwise would have. And now, did I think Penn State was going to make to the Final Four? No, I did not. I thought they'd be like a 10-2 team and not in, but they went, you know, they made it to the Final Four. But I think those hires were also really strong hires and helped this team kind of take that jump from, like you said, Trev, beat the teams you're supposed to. And then, you know, they're a lot like, I think that, Trev, did you say this? Like during the show, or did you say this to me on the phone? But they're a lot like, and I don't mean this as disrespectful as it sounds because you guys know how I feel about them, but they're a lot like the Brian Kelly teams.
Yeah.
And before Freeman, where they beat everybody they're supposed to, but they just can't beat the best teams. They got to the college football playoff a couple times, but you knew they weren't. Now, this team is very talented, and they stack up a lot better against Notre Dame than Notre Dame stacked up against Bama in 2012. But the point is like, this is what they're trying to prove, and then Notre Dame is trying to show, like, no, sorry, you're not, you know, maybe you do that next year, but you're not doing that to someone else next year, but you're not doing that to us this year. But that's kind of how they got there.
All right. Well, that's kind of the summary of where Penn State is and who they are coming into this game. We're going to dive a little deeper into the offense and the defense in just a second. But before we do, make sure you hit that like button, that subscribe button, that notification bell, share with your family and friends, and, of course, jump on the boards.irishbreakdown.com for all of your breakdown needs and some pretty lively discussion going on over there on the boards as well. And so if you want to get involved, you think this chat is fun on the YouTube, you need to get over to the boards. There's a lot of good stuff over there, so you're definitely going to want to check that out. Would really appreciate that. So jump on the boards.irishbreakdown.com. It's not too late for those post-Christmas gifts. All right, just kick off the 25 calendar year with a gift subscription to the boards at boards@irishbreakdown.com. All right, gentlemen, let's jump into the Penn State offense. And I know this is usually stuff that you guys do during the day, so I feel like I'm in the Wayback Machine with Brian when you and I would do it, and I'd be like tucked away in a classroom like during the day on my prep, and we'd be breaking down the offense and the defense of the upcoming opponent for Notre Dame. So it's kind of fun to jump in here, but
we've grown a little bit.
I know, just a little bit. I don't have like the cinder block background anymore or whatever, so that's a good thing. But your first thoughts on the Penn State offense, guys, on, who they are, what they look like, as you're watching film and you're watching games of Penn State, your thoughts on them offensively, and then we'll kind of jump into the numbers. Trevor, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I mean, watching them as an offense, they are. To me, it's a very similar style of what Penn State has kind of been before. Like they look to establish the ground game, and that's something that they've historically wanted to do. They have a good quarterback. I look, Drew Aller, I think, is a quarterback that gets a lot of hate, and because I think he had that 5-star rating coming into college, and people were expecting him to be that quarterback to take Penn State to that next level. Right. There was some, discussion about Trace McSorley and if he could do it, and Sean Clifford and if he could do it. Right. And, they get this 5-star kid in Drew Aller, and they were expecting him to come and light the world on fire and be Penn State's version of Joe Burrow. And he hasn't done that from a statistical standpoint, but he has improved significantly, in my opinion, from where he was at the year before. And I think the numbers start to reflect that as well. Right. They're averaging 33.7 points per game. We just talked about what they did to their playoff opponents so far, right? They've outscored them 69-24. They were able to put up 37 points against that Oregon defense. That was something that Ohio State didn't even do the first time that they played, right? Albeit, one of them was at Oregon, the other one was a neutral site game, but still, point remains the same. And so they have two really good dynamic running backs. Kaytron Allen and Nicholas Singleton are two really good backs, and those were two guys that each went over 100 yards. And when Penn State's at their best, they're a really good 1-2 punch combo, right? Like it's similar to Notre Dame's backfield when we talk about when Notre Dame's run game is really humming. Jeremiah Love comes in and he's doing his thing for 2 series. Jadarian Price comes in and starts doing his thing for a series or 2, right? And when Penn State's at their best, it's the same thing. And then obviously Tyler Warren on offense is a matchup nightmare, a kid that's playing above his recruiting level, right? Brian, you said he came in as a 3-star, crazy. Marcus Freeman even talked about him as being, arguably one of the better players in all of college football, not just within the playoffs. And it's shown. They move him all around the field. They'll line him up in the backfield. They'll line him up in the Wildcat. He was one of the people in some of Penn State's offensive possessions against Ohio State. I think he was their leading rusher in that game. I think he had like 3 rushes for 47 yards in that game, right? So they look for ways to get the football into the hands of Tyler Warren, into Nicholas Singleton hands, and Kaytron Allen's hands, right? They have 32 rushing touchdowns on the season. It ranks 15th in the country. Rush yards, they're a really, really efficient rushing offense. They rank inside of the top 20 in yards per rush. They average over 200 rushing yards per game. So to my point of they're really good when both of their backs contribute, it's a lot like that, right? I mean, one of them's going for 120, the other one's going for 80. Some games are both going over 100. Some games, one of them's going for 75, the other one's going for 125. It's some combination of that, right? I do think Nicholas Singleton is a little bit more dynamic coming out of the backfield as a pass catcher as opposed to Kaytron Allen.
Yeah.
Allen's definitely more the bigger bruiser type of running back. Nicholas Singleton is a little bit more agile than he is. But overall, it's a better Penn State offense than what we've seen in the past, Brian.
Well, part of that's out of design. I mean, you see the numbers, right? I mean, they rank 24th in the country in scoring, 25th in total yards, but they rank 10th in yards per play, and 18th in rushing yards, and 17th in yards per rush, 15th, as you mentioned, in touchdowns, 14th in fewest yards, tackles for loss allowed, 15th in third down. The offense, they're only 58th in passing yards, but they're 14th in yards per attempt, which to me is an 8th in quarterback rating. The 58th just comes from usage. And you got 2 running backs with over 1,000 yards. You're not throwing 87,000 times a game when you've got 2 running backs with over 1,000 yards. I don't care what point in the season you are. So Trev, I agree with you. I think this is a more dynamic version of Penn State. They're not a super dynamic team at this point in time. I mean, they have some of the issues that Notre Dame has on offense with, their lack of, let's say, big play production at the receiver position. The one thing I did want to discuss, too, is I said before the season, I've always felt Drew Aller got a bad rap. And Trevor, I think you knocked on the reason why. It was because of the expectations. I've made this point in the NFL draft. I mean, Vince, if you have a guy that's drafted in the 5th round and a guy that's drafted in the 1st round, and they have the same exact production over the course of 3 or 4 years, the guy that's the 4th or 5th round is going to be considered, wow, what a great story. And the guy that's first round pick, he's been okay. But and I've used this about Dak Prescott. I think Dak Prescott has gotten more grace for his mistakes and shortcomings because he was a 4th round pick. And I don't know that the expectations were as high, even as far into his career as he is, where Jared Goff never gets the credit I think he deserves. Matt Stafford never gets the credit I think he deserves. Why? Because they were number 1 overall picks. I mean, Jared Goff has won a lot more playoff games than Dak Prescott has. Matt Stafford's won a Super Bowl. He even took the Lions to the playoffs when they were terrible. And so, but it's why? Because the expectation coming in. Drew Aller had 25 touchdowns and 2 picks last year as a true sophomore. Now, yeah, they weren't a super high explosive, throw the ball a million times all over the field, that type of team, but he was a good football player, and he's still a good football player. And they're asking him a lot more out of him this year, guys. I mean, he went from 6.8 yards per attempt last year to 8.6 this year. But here's the thing about it is, for me, Trev, is they're a lot better schemed this year with Andy Kotelnicki. There's a lot more creativity. He knows they don't have dynamic pass weapons outside of Tyler Warren. So he does 2 things. Number 1, it's impossible to know where Tyler Warren's going to be on any given play. Because if he was, then it'd be a lot easier to game plan to stop him, because he knows teams are going to want to stop 44. Because if they shut down 44 in the pass game, we're toast. And that's just the reality. With all due respect to, the other players at receiver, with all due respect to, guys like Harrison Wallace and Amari Evans and Liam Clifford and Julian Fleming, who had a huge catch against Notre Dame last year. They got a really good freshman tight end that's a really good football player as well. It's Tyler Warren and then just kind of everybody else. And everybody else isn't going to beat you if you shut down Tyler Warren. So Andy Kotelnicki, and
he lines up at quarterback sometimes.
Exactly.
Wildcat.
Exactly. You never know where he's going to be.
Correct.
Vince.
You got to know. That's one thing in preparation that I'm sure Al Golden is all over. But you've got to identify where 44 is, and 44 is a number that's
Vince.
Kind of odd, but you've got to identify where 44 is.
Because you don't know where he's going to be when they break the huddle or line up. You've got to quickly identify him, and you've got to identify 10.
I guarantee you,
in the pass game.
I guarantee you there will be segments in practice where it's just identify 44. You know what I mean? Like, where's he going when he comes out of the huddle? Where does he line up? You've got to know, and you got to communicate. Look, Notre Dame's been really good about communicating on defense this year. It's one of their better qualities, to be honest with you. So they're going to identify where he is, but not only do you have to identify it with your eyes, but then you have to identify it with your alignment and everything else. So that's a challenge.
So I think that's a big part of it. And also Penn State's going to watch the Georgia game, and we'll talk more about this in the future breakdowns, but they're going to watch the Georgia game. They're going to have watched the Northern Illinois game, and they're going to say, hey, way that we use our backs, we're going to try to do something with some misdirection stuff to our running backs to get their linebackers to give up a big play in the pass game. And they have to. And the thing is, they have to do that. And I've given Mike Denbrock a lot of credit for he's coaching the team he has, not coaching the team he wants to have. I think early in the season, there was a little bit of he's coaching the team he wants, because I don't know that he necessarily knew what he had in Riley Leonard because he didn't have him for the spring. But as Trev and I broke this down after the coming out of the bye, it was very clear from the Stanford game immediately after the bye that Mike Denbrock had adjusted his offense, and he was now coaching the offense. He now had a better grasp of who he had, not what he wanted or what he thought he had. And we've seen a different offense since then. And I think Andy Kotelnicki's done a great job of that as well. Look, I got 2 really good running backs. I've got the best tight end in college football. With all due respect to the kid from Bowling Green, if Tyler Warren played at Bowling Green against MAC teams every week, he would have way more production if he was targeted in that offense as that kid. And a great kid. I'm sure he's a good player. I've seen him play a couple times. He's a good player. It's not Tyler Warren. You look at that USC game. If you just take Tyler Warren off that team and you put any tight end in college football on that team in that game, they do not beat USC. That's one of the greatest individual performances I've ever seen from a tight end in a game.
That's crazy.
Outstanding. I mean, just like the numbers were like his numbers were about what a lot of teams' tight ends do on a season, guys, against Penn State. And I'm not even being hyperbolic with that. He had 17 catches for 224 yards and a touchdown against USC alone. This is a tight end with 4 100-yard games this season. So I thought Ohio State did a really nice job of keeping his production at a minimum. They did a really nice job of not letting Singleton and Allen kind of get rolling in the pass game or the run game, and Notre Dame's going to have to follow a similar standpoint. Now, Singleton's healthier now than he was then, but he was healthier then than he was, a couple weeks earlier, like against USC. But that's going to be a big key because that's their horses. That's it. Those three guys, that's their offense. And Drew Aller's a really nice kind of trigger man. He's become a good game manager. He'll make the occasional big-time throw because he's got a big-time arm. But he's still a relatively young quarterback. He's a true junior. And he's not a guy that I think has shown he can completely put a team on his shoulders and just say, I'm going to will you to victory if Tyler Warren's not going off. And that's going to be a big part of this. And then I think the final piece to this, guys, is they're going to have to get to the quarterback in this game because it's a lot like we talked about in Indiana. When Curtis Rourke gets pressured a lot, he's a lot less. There's a noticeable drop-off when he's pressured compared his effectiveness when he's pressured. Drew Aller's a very talented quarterback, but my one concern with him as I break down his film and start projecting to the next level or elite talent and all these other kind of things, the one concern I have with him is he's got a very long release and he can kind of snap it off like quick game wise pretty well. But when he's pressured, it's hard for him to really get the kind of mustard on it that he wants because he has that long release. And I think that's something where if Notre Dame can consistently get pressure on him, then they're going to have a chance to create a lot of problems. If you look at his numbers on the season under pressure, just according to Pro Football Focus, he's a sub 50% passer when under pressure. And so that's obviously not, I mean, that's kind of like Notre Dame's, similar to what Notre Dame's production has been this season. Now, few quarterbacks are just phenomenal when they're under pressure, right? I mean, that's not an earth-shattering thing. Like, hey, when you pressure this guy, he's not as good. That was also true for like Peyton Manning and, but like when you just look at the overall production, for example, you compare it to Curtis Rourke, for example. Okay, Drew Aller was at 47.3%. Curtis Rourke was only 48.8, but Curtis Rourke averaged 9.4 yards per attempt. Drew Aller's at 7.0. And there's just, to me, there was just more of that from him. When he's under pressure, there's just more of those type of misses and mistakes where you can kind of get them out of rhythm. Not that he's going to turn the ball over because he doesn't turn the ball over a whole lot, but you can get him out of rhythm and create some incompletions that get them behind the sticks, and that's where no offense wants to be. So, they're a team that's got to be on schedule. You look at them down there, a couple things that stand out. You look at their big plays. They rank 33rd in 20-plus yard runs. They rank 86th in completions of 30 yards or more. This is not generally a big play offense. They were against Oregon, but it's not generally a big play offense, so you got to limit the big plays. They want to be methodical, and that's kind of usually where Notre Dame has thrived, guys, is those methodical teams don't normally do real well against Notre Dame. It's the big play teams that tend to do a little bit better. So that's going to be a key part, is that battle in the trenches is going to be a big part of how this game goes. But this is a good offense, guys, and Trev nailed it, who their top players are. We covered that. But this is a team that wants to come out and run the football, be multiple, a lot of motions, a lot of shifts, a lot of little gimmicky type of things.
Yep.
They'll do things where they'll take like two of their offensive tackles and put them out wide. They'll put one of their tackles and they'll bring a tackle in and put them in motion and crack block. And they do a lot of that stuff. Sometimes I think he does too much. It's like, okay, now you're just getting too cute and it's telegraphed a little bit. But when Andy Kotelnicki is in his bag a little bit, as people like to say, he can get real creative and he can do some things against you. And you're going to have some answers for some of that stuff to try to limit those big play opportunities that can create problems for people.
Yeah, when you watch Penn State play, they don't really run right at you. They do a lot of, they're not just going to do misdirection and all of that, but that's where they've been successful, is when they affect the eyes of the defense, and they're going to try to do that to Notre Dame. Now, Notre Dame has been very good, I think, this year with their linebacker play, not getting themselves out leveraged. I mean, they're early on, not so much. And I think you kind of touched on that, Brian, when you talked about, Al Golden kind of coaching for the team that he wants as opposed to the team that he has. Look, this team is very fast and athletic, and so you can use that to your advantage. And Penn State's going to try to get the eyes off so that they're a step behind and that they can't get the edge and things like that. What I think Penn State does very, very well in the run game is I do think they try to out leverage teams on a regular basis. And I think that they've done a pretty decent job of that, especially out leveraging teams to the outside and with their little tosses and some of the things that they do to get their guy outside quicker than you can get outside. Right. Go ahead.
No, I'm agreeing with you.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That's hurt Notre Dame this year. So I'm just like, I'm pointing to you like that
early.
Point.
That hurt Notre Dame early. I don't think that has hurt Notre Dame lately in the second half of the season. Teams keep trying, but they're not as successful as teams were earlier.
Florida State hit a couple, Virginia hit one, but by and large, it hasn't hurt them as much as it did.
Right.
Early, yeah.
And Georgia tried to do it. Georgia tried to get outside on Notre Dame. It did not work. It did not work. And
part of that, Vince, is here's the difference, because you're on to something here. The difference is a couple of those teams that did that, those were wrinkles that Notre Dame hadn't seen before.
Correct. And then they adjusted.
Right. Whereas with USC and Georgia, those are things that they have seen on film. There was better preparation for it. And that's going to be true of Penn State, is they've seen it on film. The stuff that has hurt Notre Dame this year was stuff where they, like the read zone from Tyler Shuck. I don't remember seeing a read zone from Tyler Shuck in the first 3-4 games of the year. Maybe they did, Trev. Maybe you saw it. I don't remember that being a big thing. So you're like shocked when they like run a read zone at their own 5-yard line. You're like, wait a minute, hold on a second. He has the ball. I don't fall for that very often. I normally can read it, but I was just running it back because I wasn't even thinking that it might be a read zone on that particular play.
Right.
Apparently, neither was Kingston or Asa.
Penn State will run read zone.
But that's the point. Is those are things that they show.
Right.
And that's the thing about Georgia. Georgia showed that quick pitch stuff. They showed the reverse stuff. They showed that we talked about it in our breakdown last week. Trev and I did. So it's about being ready for it and identifying it. Notre Dame did. And so that's one difference between the teams that kind of caught them on some of that stuff. Those were things where they were showing stuff that Notre Dame hadn't necessarily seen a lot of on film, and then they had to adjust to it. Whereas the teams that had done it a lot on film and tried it against Notre Dame, it didn't work as much because there was some preparation for it.
Right.
So I think it's a really good observation because Penn State has shown that stuff on film.
Sure. I think another thing that I'm going to be interested to see out of Penn State's offense as well is Georgia started to show a little bit of success when they went tempo against Notre Dame. And we kind of talked a lot about how Notre Dame's going to have to do a good job of playing the Where's Waldo game as far as where Tyler Warren lines up. And you could put Notre Dame's defense in a potential bind if you start running a little bit of tempo and changing where you align Tyler Warren. So I think that's going to be something interesting that Andy Kotelnicki might do on Thursday, especially with the success that Georgia had. Like when their offense was able to move the ball down the field, they were running with a little bit of pace. So I think that's going to be something interesting that they could do. And another thing, too, that I was thinking about their offense is they've had a lot of games. Brian, you brought it up how, this team doesn't quit, and they came back from Bowling Green, and it was a 14-13 game against Wisconsin. And at one point, the Oregon game was 28-10. Stylistically, it's weird because this isn't a team that's built to be able to come back like that because they don't have a lot of talent on the perimeter. Right, it's Nicholas Singleton, it's Tyler Warren, and like the receivers are good. Like I don't want to make them sound like they're bums and they shouldn't be playing at the D1 level.
And Amari Evans looked good early against Boise State last week too.
But yeah, it's weird that a team that's kind of built like this, that likes to slow the pace down, has shown at times this year that they are able to come back. They were down against USC, and they came back and rallied and ended up winning in overtime. So I do think that is a little bit interesting because typically you don't see teams that schematically do things the way that Penn State does and likes to control the line of scrimmage and the time of possession the way Penn State does, able to come back from multiple scores, right? So for anybody, and I was under this impression a little bit too until I started diving into some of Penn State's film of if Notre Dame's able to jump out to a lead, not a lot of teams can come back on this defense, and they're playing against a team in back-to-back weeks that have shown that there's no deficit that they can't turn into a football game, So I think that's another interesting facet to Penn State's offense as well.
Yep. Yeah, I would be based on what Georgia did to Notre Dame, or didn't do, as the case may be, in the run game, I would be surprised if Penn State came out and just tried to run it right up the middle and try to jam it down Notre Dame's throat. I think they're going to try to be, like we said earlier, a little bit more finesse with their run game, a little bit more misdirection and things like that. And I'm interested to see how Notre Dame handles that, to be perfectly honest with you. They proved that they can stop the run up the middle, right? They proved that they can do certain things coming downhill, because they were trying some jets. Georgia tried to do some jets, and they tried to do, some different things to get to the outside. But it wasn't a finesse run game because that's not who Georgia is. And I feel like Penn State's a little bit more of that. And so it's a different type of running game, right? And they've got more dynamic running backs than Georgia does, right? So if they can get the angle, if they can do certain things, what does that look like? I think that's going to be a challenge for Notre Dame. I think that they are up to the task. But I think the different style of run game is going to be interesting here. So that's kind of what I took away from watching Penn State.
Yeah, for sure.
I'd say this is the best coach Penn State offense they've had in a while.
That's fair.
And if I'm a Penn State fan, no matter what happens in this game, if Notre Dame does what we think they're going to do to Penn State, as long as you keep Andy Kotelnicki, they're going to keep getting better.
Yeah.
Because just like with Mike Denbrock and Notre Dame, get them in year 2 in that system, year 3 in that system, year 4 in that system, and they're going to be better. The future's bright there, which, Vince, is why I said, I thought last year's 2-loss Penn State team was super overrated. I said that constantly. And I don't mean like this year overrated. I mean like they shouldn't be number 4. They should be number 8. I mean, They shouldn't have been in the top 15 last year. Super overrated. So when they got beat by Ole Miss, I'm like, yeah, they're not that good. They were super overhyped. And I said before the year, I think this team is going to be better because I did not like what's his name? The guy that they hired from Oklahoma State. I can't remember what his name was. Last name starts with a Y. Their offensive coordinator they got rid of. I was not a big fan of his. I didn't like him at Oklahoma State. I thought he benefited from offenses that were built before he got there, and his job was just don't F it up. I think he followed Todd Monken at one point in time. That's your job with you replace Todd Monken is don't screw this up. You know what I mean? Yursich I think is what his name was. And then, of course, he comes in at Penn State and he's replacing Joe Moorhead, who had done a great job as the offensive coordinator at Penn State. To me, Andy Kotelnicki is more in the Joe Moorhead realm of play callers than the guy that he replaced. So I think they're going to keep getting better. And if Drew Aller comes back next year, which he says he is, but, things change, but he says he is, and I think he is, and I think he needs to, then they're only going to get better and better and better. But right now, like you said, they're in a similar boat to Notre Dame is they got to improve their talent on the perimeter, especially with Tyler Warren gone, because you won't have him to rely on. And they're going to have to do that, because if they can do that, then they'll be okay.
No doubt. And I do think Drew Aller is a wild card in this game, right? I mean, if he throws the ball the way he did against Boise State, granted, he was if he throws the way he did against Boise State, that's going to be a challenge, right? I mean, that's the best he's thrown the ball all season, in my opinion. And he is a challenge when he pulls. If you're not going to account for him in the run game, look, he's not dynamic in the run game.
He can move the chains,
but he can move the chains. That's exactly right. And he's not afraid to pull the ball and run, right? So you have to account for Drew Aller. Okay. He's not Riley Leonard in the run game, but he'll move the chains. He'll be fine. So you have to account for him. So he's kind of the wild card for me in all of this. I feel good about Notre Dame against their run. Look, Notre Dame secondary has been playing very well too, right? But don't underestimate Drew Aller, I guess is what I'm saying, because he can.
You hear that, Detroit Hunter? You hear that? Detroit Hunter hates Drew Aller.
Oh, does he? Well, look, he can hurt you. He can hurt you, right? But I also think he can.
But you can rattle him,
you're rattling
too.
Him.
Right?
That's exactly.
And that's going to be a big key. We'll talk a lot about that when we get into our breakdown. So I think you guys had some great points about their offense. There's no doubt. We'll get to defense next. Vince, why don't you give us a little quick hello, and then I have one comment I need to make before we move on to the defensive one.
A quick hello? I don't know what you mean by that.
I'm gonna have a quick comment, like the quick, just hey, the like, the subscribe, and then I have.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, hey, that's kind of our breakdown on the offense. Brian's gonna have one little more of a tidbit. Make sure you hit that like button, that subscribe button, that notification bell, share with your family and friends, and of course, jump on the boards at irishbreakdown.com. Very important. if you want to be locked in on everything that is Notre Dame in this playoff and everything that Notre Dame is doing. So boards.irishbreakdown.com, Brian.
Penn State fans that are in the chat. We love it when fans from other teams come into our chat. We have Archer452 is an Ohio State fan. Antoine Johnson comes in our show. He is a Michigan fan. We had Georgia fan. Sean D was in our chat last week. He was great. Mr. Bucknuts is an Ohio State. He ain't Notre Dame fan. He's been good. We used to remember, was it Martin? I forget his first name. Our guy, the Bama fan, right? Ladarius or whatever his name was, right? You remember him?
Yeah. Yep.
But come in here to talk ball. Come in here to have a real football discussion. Come in here to act like a grown-up. If you're going to come in here and just be an idiot, we're going to ban you and block you. You don't get banned for being a Georgia fan. You don't get banned for being a Penn State fan. You don't get banned for having a view that we don't agree with. Archer and I disagree all the time. But if you're going to say things like Notre Dame sucks or Notre Dame, this is the best offensive line Notre Dame has played, just go look at the rushing yards and sacks allowed. And then when someone does that, you realize they're not even top 3 in rushing yards or fewest sacks allowed. If you're just going to be a troll, you're going to go. Notre Dame fans, don't feed trolls. If someone's in there being an idiot, don't go at them because they're doing exactly what they want. They want you to respond. They want you to flame. Just ignore it and then let me deal with it. Okay? But if you're going to come in here, be an adult, or we're going to ban you because we don't have time to deal with idiots. And so you won't be around here very long. So, yes. And this is not the United States of America. This is the United States of Brian Driscoll. And so I get to determine how things go. So, yeah. So
fantastic.
A Notre Dame fan's about to get put in timeout because you don't tell me how to run my show. Ladarius, that's who it was. And he was a great guy.
Yeah, Ladarius. Yeah, he was awesome. He was fantastic. I hope he's doing okay. I haven't seen him in the chat in a while, so I hope he's doing
He lost a parent and he went through some tough times. So I think that's kind of, I think
fair.
More things in football were there.
That's fair. Let's move on to the offense. The defense, gentlemen, and talk a little Nittany Lion defense. And this is, in my opinion, it's the better of the two sides of the ball. This is the group that has got them where they are. Is a very, very good defense. Notre Dame is just stacking up games against good defenses at this point, and Penn State's is no slouch. They're very, very good defense, and Notre Dame's gonna have their hands full defensively. Brian, why don't you kick us off with your thoughts on the Penn State defense and kind of where things stack up, with their stats and all of that. First look.
So I'm explaining to someone what political speech means or what freedom of speech means because some people still don't understand what that means. They're a lot like Notre Dame guys, and this is kind of what got them here, right? Like their offense is good and their offense does some good things, and it's dangerous if you don't prepare for it. Just like Notre Dame's offense is dangerous if you don't play well against it, but they're here because of their defense. Mm-hmm. And Tom Allen has done a really nice job. And I will say this, and I'm curious what some of the Ohio State fans in the chat think and what some of the Penn State fans that can think for themselves and act like grown-ups in the chat think about this team. I don't even think this is nearly as talented. And Trev, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this as well. I don't think this is as talented of a defense as they've had in the past. Now, they have some studs. Don't get me wrong. Abdul Carter's a first-round pick. He's a special, twitchy, sometimes you're like, he had to be offsides on that one. Like, there's no way he got around the edge without being offsides. And then you rewind it and you're like, nope, he wasn't offsides. He's just that fast off the ball, right? I mean, he's a heck of a player. Jalen Reed's a really good safety. Tony Rojas is a really athletic linebacker, but I'm talking about like overall, they don't have like the high level athletes in the secondary that they've had in past years. They don't have the linebacking core overall. Like Kobe King's a really good football player, but he's more like a Tavon Coney than he is a Jalen Smith, right? Or some of the greats that Penn State has had, even in recent seasons. And so I part of the success isn't because they're just way more talented than everybody else, because in some spots, like Zane Durant's a lot like Howard Cross, 6'1", 288. He gets by on athleticism and quickness and leverage. they're just coached better, in my opinion. And not that they weren't coached well in past years, but I always thought, I'll be honest with you, Trev, I thought in past years under previous coordinators, they kind of underachieved a little bit with their talent they had on defense. Like they would be good again. And this is what killed them in some of those big games, because they would, look great against everybody else. And then they'd play Ohio State and get work, a good Ohio State team and get work, not the 16 Ohio State team that they beat. Because as Clemson showed that year, that's not a very good Ohio State. That was not a very good Ohio State football team in 2016. So it just was one of those things where when I looked at them, I just kind of felt like whenever they played somebody on their level, they would kind of disappoint relative to their talent level, to be completely honest. I mean, you look at the 2022 team that everybody thought was so good, and they went 11-2, but they gave up 41 points to Michigan and 44 points to Ohio State, like the only two good teams they played all year, and then they'd hold Ohio to 10 and a bad Auburn team to 12 and Central Michigan to 14 and Northwestern to 7 and Minnesota to 17 and a bad Indiana team to 14 and Maryland to 0 and Rutgers to 10. And then you're like, oh, what a great defense. And I'm like, no, they played two teams with a pulse all year and they both put 40 on them. You know what I mean? And that was just kind of always the story with those Penn State teams. I felt like their defenses were always more bark than they were bite. I think back to that 2019 season where they were a really good team and they were 11-2, but they played like 3 or 4 good teams all year. They gave up 31 to Minnesota and Tanner Morgan lit them up with the receiving core he had. Ohio State put 28 up on him, beat him by 11. Memphis even moved the ball all over him that year in the Cotton Bowl. This year, I think they combine good talent and pretty darn good talent up front. But like linebacker secondary is not as talented as it's been, but it's the best coached group of linebackers and DBs they've had in a long time. Like they just don't make a lot of mistakes, Trevor. Like they're a lot like Georgia that I talked about with Georgia last week, in that, and we'll break down sort of the differences schematically between the two. But what I mean is what we said about Georgia wasn't great on defense because they have, 8 future first round draft picks on their defense. They might have 8 on their defensive line, but in linebacker, but like their secondary doesn't have the high level talent they've had in past years outside of Malachi Starks. And I think Penn State's similar. This version of Penn State is more about they're very sound. They fly to the football. They don't make a lot of mistakes. They don't get beat. I mean, you look at it here. They rank 28th in the country in 20 yards runs, allowing runs of 20 yards or more. They're 20th in the country in allowing gains of 30 yards or more in the pass game. They're 4th in red zone defense, 30th in third down defense, 27th in passing yards. They're not necessarily great at a lot of things, although their rush defense is pretty good. I think part of that's the schedule. But guys, I like watching this defense on film because it's so well coached. They're so disciplined. They just don't make a ton of mistakes. And some of the stuff that Ohio State was doing in the second, third quarter to kind of get guys open was really well schemed stuff. And they had to kind of get in that grab bag of tricks a little bit to kind of get guys open. So I've been impressed with this defense, Trevor. And even in the game they lost against Ohio State, their defense is really the only reason it was close. I mean, they're literally scored the only touchdown that Penn State had in that game was from their defense. I think was it Dom DeLuca that stepped in front of that slant route and picked it off and kept them in that game. They forced that fumble of Will Howard, going into the red zone. So the Oregon game was the one that exposed them a little bit if you have that kind of dynamic speed at receiver, but Notre Dame doesn't have that kind of speed at receiver. And so I don't know that Notre Dame's built in a way like Oregon is to just go up and down the field on them in a shootout, throwing the football all over the place. Doesn't mean there's not some things they can do, but I really like this defensive football team, guys. And this has been kind of their best group all year. And when they have a struggle game in the regular season, it's been like, okay, they give up 25 to Minnesota, and it's like, okay, I can live with that. But I think this is the unit that they're here in this game in the semifinals because of this unit right here.
Absolutely.
In my opinion.
Trevor, thoughts on the defense?
Yeah, man. I mean, I think Brian hit everything perfectly. They like to keep everything in front of them. They don't give up a lot of big plays, right? You go through and you look at, they've only allowed 12 runs of 20 yards or more. That ranks inside of the top 30. They've only given up they've only given up 12 completions of 30 or more, which ranks in the top 20, right? They fly downhill. They have 111 tackles for loss on the season, which ranks inside of the top 10. But I'm with you as far as what the talent goes. Right. You brought up like what are, this team kind of reminds you and has some similarities of like past Notre Dame teams. And I don't mean that in a slight, right? But what was some of the things that we talked about with previous Notre Dame teams is like they would have like players sprinkled throughout that were like, yo, that guy's a dude. You know what I'm saying? Like they would have, yo, Jalen Smith is a dude. And then he's lined up next to Joe Schmidt, kind of like that try hard, like let's grind it out guy. You know, you had Kyle Hamilton at safety. You know what I mean? And then like sometimes he would like rotate in next to like a DJ Brown. And it's just like, well, okay, DJ Brown's a good try hard guy, good leader, you know, and I see some similarities with Penn State, right? Like we brought their second leading tackler in their linebacking core is Tony Rojas, who you said is kind of like that Tavon Coney kind of guy.
No, Kobe King is like Tavon.
King,
Tony Rojas is the one legit athlete they have.
Yeah, sorry.
But like, yeah, Kobe King, he's their Mike. He's more of like a Tavon Coney where he, you know, and then Dom DeLuca reminds me a lot of like a, not quite as good, but a lot of like a JD Bertrand type of guy. You know, I called him to a friend of mine. I said, he's kind of like a poor man's Jack Kaiser, you know, like, but I think he's the guy that had the pick 6 against Ohio State.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And they're still good players, right? Like the players that we're mentioning at Notre Dame are still good players, but it's not like the Notre Dame defense now where you have Xavier Watts and Adon Schuler. You have Drake Bowen and Jack Kaiser and Jaden Osbury. You have Christian Gray. At one point in time, you had Christian Gray and Ben Morrison and Leonard Moore. You know what I mean? So it's a little bit different how they're spread out, but what they're lacking in their depth of top tier talent like that, they're making up for in really, really good coaching. They're a very fundamentally sound team. They don't miss a lot of tackles. They don't give up a lot of big plays. They've only given up 8 rushing touchdowns this year, which ranks 3rd in the country. You know what I mean? They've given up 17 passing touchdowns, but they've been playing a lot of teams that kind of have to.
And they also have played 15 games.
Right. I
mean, so like some of those volume numbers are going to look higher, like kind of like 20+ yard runs and 30. I mean, when you've played now, some teams have only played 12 games. Some teams have only played 13 games. They're now going on 15, and this will be their 16th game. So some of those volume numbers are going to look a little higher.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I found was interesting, kind of looking at the CFP stats that we look at all the time to get these numbers. But Penn State has a good defense, man. I mean, I brought it up talking about, like I brought this up in the post-game show from the Georgia game, is Penn State has a lot of success early as a team when their defense gets points on the board early. Yeah. Look what they did against SMU. Back-to-back pick sixes.
Ohio State. That got them going against Ohio State. Yeah.
Right. And then in the games where they haven't, they've struggled, right? Look what happened with Oregon. They didn't get an early pick, big interception like that against USC. USC jumped out on them. So things like that. This defense does have some vulnerabilities, similar like a lot of defenses do, right? Like there's no perfect defense in the rest of the playoffs. There's no perfect offense in the rest of the playoffs. Every team has their flaws, but nonetheless, this is still a really good Penn State defense and one that's significantly more well coached as opposed to previous Penn State defenses, in my opinion.
They're very, like you said, Trev, they're very sound. They get the most out of the players that they have. Mm-hmm. And again, when we talk about they don't have the talent they used to have, they're not throwing bums out there. And that's not meant to be an insult. It's actually a compliment because they had a safety, one of their top safeties went down. I don't know if it was preseason or early in the season, the Winston kid, right? He went down early. He's a really good football player. Zane Durant's 6'1", 288 pounds. They have the number 6 rush, 8 rush defense in the country, and their best defensive tackle is 288 pounds. Their stud defensive end is a converted linebacker. You know what I mean? It's because they play hard. They have good athletes, and they're coached extremely well. And then they have enough elite talent in a guy like Abdul Carter to where when he's going off or he's in a mat where you've got a bad edge matchup, which we'll talk about later in the week, then you can have some problems. He can kind of be that great neutralizer of an offense as well. So you got to find ways to handle him. But that's the thing about their defense. I think this is the part about their team this is the best part of Notre Dame's got a good offense. And their numbers are impressive in a lot of areas. But what got them here is having an elite defense. And what got Penn State here is having a really outstanding defense.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you and I talked about this earlier today, Brian. Penn State's willing to change some things up based on who they're playing. You know, they ran a different defense against Boise State at times, trying to make sure that
Yeah.
they shut down Ashton Genty. They ran with like a 5-2 essentially. You know what I mean? Because they were
5-2
kind of
personnel, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they were kind of daring Boise State to throw the ball over the top, right?
And that was when they were in 12 personnel, just for the record. Like when they
Right.
came out in 11 personnel, they weren't like still playing a 5-2. But
Sure.
yeah, but Boise does a lot of 12 personnel, just
Right.
like, you know,
Notre Dame. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So they're willing to adjust some of the things that they do in preparation for it, opponent specific. And so, I think they've probably put everything on film at this point. I don't think they're going to throw out some sort of a crazy defense or anything like that. What I'm saying is they're not, a rigid married to a system situation. They're willing to, hey, we got to do this to stop this, and we got to do this to do this. And so, look, it's a defense that is willing to make changes, that they're willing to adapt. And I think that's important to understand too.
Yeah.
If you're Mike Denbrock and you're scheming against this defense, throw some stuff at them that they haven't seen before, some things like that, kind of keep them on their toes. Because I think one of the things that Penn State prides themselves on is the preparation and how they prepare for another team's offense. So give them something that they haven't seen at times. So it's going to be a good matchup. There's no doubt about it. It's going to be a good matchup.
It is. This is what I like about this matchup, Vince, is from a coordinator standpoint. And this isn't meaning to take shots at either head coach. It's just from a coordinator standpoint, these are 4 really good football coaches.
Yeah.
And if you're someone who likes the nerdy part of the game, which is like thinking about the matchups and the play calling and the sequencing and all that kind of stuff, this is what I'm looking forward to. Because I do think these are 2 really good football teams and 4 really good coached units. Notre Dame's offense, Notre Dame's defense, and then Penn State's offense, and then Penn State's defense. Vince, is that it for the defensive version of what we're going to talk about, or did we had a little bit more to get to on that one?
Stats, top players, strengths, where Notre Dame can exploit. I think that was kind of
before we kind of move on to the final segment, because we have some super chats in here. I did want to talk about special teams.
Okay.
Because this is a very interesting part of it that I am curious to see if Notre Dame is going to be able to take advantage of Penn State here. Because we've talked about with Notre Dame this year, there's some areas where the Notre Dame offense or special teams is really good, and then there's some areas where they're not. So like when you look at, we've talked about, I like to look at efficiency numbers, right? And when you look at the offenses and defenses, they're very close. Offensive efficiency, if you look at ESPN's Football Power Index, you look at where they rank on offense. Penn State's offense ranks 8th. Notre Dame's offense ranks 14th. Both very good. Defensively, Notre Dame's defense ranks number 1. Penn State's defense ranks number 6. If you look at the Fremo Efficiency Index, Penn State's offense ranks number 5. Notre Dame's offense ranks number 14. If you look at the defensive ratings, Notre Dame is number 1. Penn State's number 4. So on the FEI, they're even higher than Penn State is. But here's where it gets really interesting. In special teams, Notre Dame on the Football Power Index ranks 69th in special teams. Not good, right? Penn State ranks 105th.
Ooh.
And the Fremo Efficiency Index, Notre Dame ranks 34th in special teams efficiency. Penn State is 65th. Here's some national rankings for Penn State. And when you look at opponent punt returns, they rank 74th. In their own punt return average, they rank 90th. And look at kickoff, opponent kick returns, they rank 45th on the season. On their own kick returns, they rank 47th, despite having some dynamic players. And here's another interesting one, Vince. Penn State has not blocked a single kick this season. They've had 3 of theirs blocked against the Notre Dame team that is one of the highest ranked teams in the nation in blocking kicks.
Or running into punters.
Right.
Just joking. Sorry. A little levity there.
Notre Dame's tied for the national lead in punts and kicks blocked with 6. With Louisville, by the way. Well, here's something crazy. I didn't realize this. Do you know that if you look at the top 10 teams in punts kicked or blocked, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them are Notre Dame or a team Notre Dame played. Louisville and Notre Dame are 1. Florida State, Georgia Tech are tied for 3. And then Indiana and Northern Illinois are tied for 6.
Wow.
Anyway, that has nothing to do with this game. But they've had 6 on the season, and Penn State has 0. They haven't blocked a single one. They've had 3 of theirs blocked. So that's a very interesting part of this matchup.
Absolutely.
Is there's really no and there's field goal kicking's been okay, like 16 of 22. Notre Dame's has been worse than that, but as we all know, when Mitch Jeter's healthy, he's a much better kicker than that. He was over 90% the 2 previous years.
3 for 3 when it mattered.
Exactly.
The other day.
Go back to the A&M game before the injury. So the special teams part of this is going to be a very, in a close game, could be a big, as we saw with Georgia last week.
I was going to say, you can't look any further than the Georgia game as far as special teams is concerned and how important it can be and how it can be an absolute game-changing, momentum-changing situation, right? And, yes, they ran into the punter a couple of times, got a couple of penalties there, didn't end up mattering in the grand scheme of things, but that kick return certainly mattered. Now, if you're Penn State, you find the kid that can kick it out of the back of the end zone and you do that every single time that you're kicking off to Notre Dame, I wouldn't even dream about giving Notre Dame an opportunity to return a kick, but they're going to have opportunities to block some kicks. And when the chips are down, I've got my money on a young freshman with some really long arms, and a chance to block a kick in a big moment. So special teams is going to be interesting because
as long as he doesn't run into the punter.
I know. Running into, I'm okay with. Roughing.
No, I'm not on 4th and 4.
Well, fair enough.
I
get that. So I get all of that. But I special teams, look, can we at least say Marcus Freeman has a lot of faith in his special teams right now?
Oh,
and
gosh, yeah.
I would be very interested to see what him and Marty Biaggi have cooked up for this game.
Which is interesting that their numbers are that way because their special teams coordinator is a buddy of mine, and I think he's really smart, and he's had some great special teams at other places.
Penn State?
Yeah, Penn State. And his Syracuse team back in 2018 had great special teams. But they just haven't been able to get that going. But they did step up. They had a kick blocked early against Minnesota, but then they stepped up late and had some big special teams plays late in the game. And so that's gonna be a very interesting part of this.
No doubt. We've got some super chats to get to, Brian. So why don't we go ahead and do that? There's one in there where I starred a non-super chat. Okay, cool. Just want to make sure. All right. So from Michael S, thank you for the super chat. Appreciate it very much. Resident pessimist. So he's starting it off with a bang. Does Love and Cross injury keep them and Notre Dame from getting the win? Go ahead, Brian.
Michael S, buddy, I love you. I don't know why you choose to live in this world, man. Just enjoy it, buddy.
Right.
If they lose, they lose, and we can deal with it then. But why live in this misery and worry about what could go wrong? Just enjoy the moment. And that doesn't mean you can't have critical thinking, but you don't always have to look at the worst case scenario all the time.
Right.
Cross had a cramp.
He's not injured.
Jeremiah Love will play. And if for some reason Jeremiah Love goes down again, that'll suck. But Jadarian Price is really good. Aeneas Williams is really good. Kedron Young is really good, as we saw watching him move around today, Vince. And they got a quarterback that's rushed for over 800 yards and 16 touchdowns. So, I mean, they're going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Just it's okay to enjoy the ride, my man.
Yep.
I would hate that if things do go well the next couple of weeks, that you spend all this time leading up to it just thinking of ways that things could go wrong. Just
don't do that.
Hope for the hope for the best, prepare for the worst. You can prepare for the worst without dwelling on it. And
exactly.
Yeah. But he did have this positive comment. Vince, he wants to know what your Sugar Bowl experience was.
Well, I mean, outside of the absolute tragedy that occurred on the date of the first game, or when the game was supposed to be scheduled, outside of that, and I know it's hard to have a conversation and put that aside, the experience was awesome. My wife and I went down and we did all kinds of tours, and we were walking the French Quarter on New Year's Eve, just checking everything out, just diving into so I'm a history nut, as you guys know, like Brian and I, we love history, and just diving into the history of New Orleans and everything, and educating my wife on a lot of the history of New Orleans. And it was awesome. We really, really enjoyed ourselves, dove into the food. I mean, the food down there is completely different than the food up here, obviously. And so that was awesome. It was a really, really great trip. Of course. I know, right?
It's the only part of America that has its own food. Think about that.
Yes, correct. Oh, 100%.
Other than New York.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the only thing that's got when you think Cajun, when you think of that. There's no other food that you really think of. Like you think of Southern food, but you don't think Georgia food or Mississippi food or Ohio food.
Well, we learned the difference between Cajun and Creole and you know, all of these different, like it was, you know, the difference between jambalaya, all of these different things. It was such an educational experience. It was so much fun. Left all my children in Indiana, which was even better. And so, you know, it was a fantastic experience. Your
kids listen to the show, dude. You are so in trouble.
It's great. Capped off by an amazing win by Notre Dame, which clearly made the trip that much better. Because the last trip I took was to the Fiesta Bowl, and they didn't win that game, and it made the trip home. I was just like, you know, but it made the trip so much better. And so we had a blast. We had an absolute blast. And thanks for asking, Michael. I appreciate that. It was really, really fun.
Yeah.
And somebody asked how many beignets were consumed. A lot is the answer.
What are those?
So it's basically like fried dough with powdered sugar all over the top of it.
Oh, I need a mess of them things. I might have cleaned out the state of Louisiana.
Listen, they had them at our breakfast buffet that we had every single day. They had those fresh and they were amazing. And then of course we went to Cafe Du Monde, which is the place where they started, I guess. And we got some of those, brought some of them home for the kids.
Nice.
They were unbelievable. Yeah. When they're fresh out of the oven, man, like so good. So good.
So we did have the super chat from EJ
Blyler. It's Ed.
Blyler.
It's my buddy Ed.
Okay. And then he had a question.
Yes.
This is the question that went with his super chat.
All right, Ed. Well, thank you for the super chat, Ed. Appreciate you very, very much.
Blyler?
Blyler. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Do you feel that Notre Dame will get back to the running production that we've seen all season, both yards and touchdowns against Penn State? I know they have a stout D. I just feel like Love, Price, Leonard will go off.
Well, I think going off in the postseason looks different than going off in the regular season when you're not playing better teams. I mean, like last week, I didn't say, boy, if Notre Dame gets to 200 yards, they're going to beat Georgia, even though they're averaging over 200 yards. I said if they get to 150 yards, they're going to win the football game. I mean, it's just a different animal when you're playing the postseason. I mean, you're playing against the Penn State team that defensively has given up 100.9 yards rushing per game. So if you get 150 yards against them, you're like 50% past their average, right? I mean, you're going to go way past their average. You look at Indiana, and your question is, are you going to get back to the running production we've seen? Well, like what, the 190 some yards they had against Indiana, who was giving up 70 yards a game in the same league that Penn State's in, that they're giving up 100 yards a game. Like it's relative. It's relative to impact at this point of the season as opposed to production. Because of the fact that it is such a different time of the year. We did this in the post-game show, so that way nobody's getting their face covered up when they're trying.
Oh, okay. I was like,
when we're doing the super chat part. But
okay.
I mean, look, they've got to be able to run the football against this team, just like they needed to be able to run the football against Georgia, and they did.
Right.
Did they dominate Georgia on the ground? No, because Georgia's entire game plan was geared around stopping Notre Dame. So they had to do different things. They had to run quarterback counter. They had to run some reverses and some jet sweeps. They may have to do that against Penn State. It's a different type of team. Sure. And Trevor and I will break down what's the difference, because in some ways they're very similar. I mean, they're gap conscious. They like to crash their linebackers, but how they get to that is way different. Where Georgia's about being big and physical, Penn State's more about being athletic, and fast and those type of things. So, of course, Indiana's defense isn't like Penn State's, even though they play in the same league and played many of the same teams, but of course it's not. Just like, Notre Dame's not going to be able to run the ball in Georgia. I mean, you talk about, Notre Dame's production in the postseason running the football. Let's not forget that in the two playoff games so far, Notre Dame is averaging over 170 yards per game against Indiana and Georgia. Right. And I don't want to hear but if you take away this run, that they're averaging 173.5 yards per game. I don't care if it takes them one carry to get 98 yards or 7 carries to get 98 yards. They got 98 yards and they got a touchdown.
Right.
Right. So that's really what it comes down to is they're going to have to be able to run the football. At times that means efficiency, moving the chains like they did against Georgia, where they were really good in some short yardage situations late in the game. At times it's going to be ripping off some chunk runs and getting some of those. So, yeah, they're going to have to find ways to do it. How you did it is going to look different than against Georgia or Indiana because they're a different defense. They attack you differently, even though structurally they're trying to accomplish the same things. And we'll get into this more this week, but how they get to that is going to be a lot different than what Georgia looked like.
Yep.
A lot smaller defensive line relative to Georgia. I would argue every bit as athletic off the edge, if not maybe a touch more so at least in one of the spots. Good at linebacker. They don't have the linebackers that Georgia had, though.
No.
But again, they don't try to play that way. Tony Rojas doesn't try to play the game like C.J. Allen. They're very different players. And, so it's a different animal. It's a very different animal. So, yeah, I guess it's up to me to pull up the next one, huh?
It's all good. It's your show, remember? Michael S., thanks for another super chat. Appreciate you. Is OSU now playing at 2019 LSU level? No.
Guys,
no.
2019 LSU hung a 63 spot on Oklahoma in the first round of the college football playoff. Can we just, no, come on. Ohio State's playing very well right now, but come on.
Carson Jackson, thank you very much for the super chat. Do you believe Notre Dame backs will have more chances at game-changing plays in this game? Do you believe Penn State backs will have more chances than Georgia backs did? I fear Penn State defense being more complete than Georgia.
It's more consistent. I mean, we said going in, you're going to get Georgia's best effort on defense, and they absolutely did. I mean, if you look at how Georgia played, Georgia's defense in some of the biggest games was at times really good. You think of what they did against Texas, and Notre Dame had more yards in the second half than I think against Georgia than Texas had in two games combined against Georgia. It's a different animal. Will they get more chances at game-changing plays? They'll get the same number of chances they had against Georgia. You got to execute. I mean, Trev, you and I talked about this upon further review. There's 4 or 5 runs where if an offensive lineman finishes his block a little better or a tight end finishes his block a little bit better, that the running back's about to break one. They didn't finish their blocks. They haven't passed games. It's really going to come down to that against Penn State is you've got to finish those blocks. And they're not easy. They're not an easy team to finish blocks against. That's why they've done what they've done running the football. Or in regard to stopping teams from running the football. It's gonna require a sound game plan. One of the things that I like that Ohio State did, because Ohio State ran the ball on them, pretty effectively, 176 yards rushing. But if you look at their numbers, it was I thought Ohio State, I mean, some of that was sacks. They had some numbers taken away from sacks, and they kind of grinded out some yards late in that game. But if you look at how the game got played out, Ohio State was able to get some of those chunk runs in this game, which helped them a lot. You think of just some of a couple times they just found just really quick pitches, just quickly get the ball outside. They would kind of read that defensive end, pitch it right outside. There was one particular play where Penn State or Ohio State went trips over, so trips to the one side, and then they brought the tight end over, and then Penn State overplayed that alignment, and then Ohio State just ran like a quick pitch right outside because there was nobody out there to defend it. You've got to try to find some ways creatively to quickly attack certain things, and I thought Ohio State did a pretty good job of that. And that's why I thought Ohio State ran the ball pretty effectively. I mean, if you look at the two backs, right, and I think how the running backs ran is a little bit more indicative of the overall production. Their running backs had 149 yards on 24 carries. That's 6.2 yards per carry against Penn State. Will Howard had 12 for 24 because you would incorporate sacks. Their receiver, Emeka Egbuka, had 2 for 6, and they had 2 team carries for -3 yards because they downed the ball at the end of the game. And they finished total with 176. So, I think that's a game where they had some success. If you look at USC, and USC found some ability, some success running the football. They ran for 189 yards, 7.9 yards per carry against them. But the teams that have been able to have success have also had some balance. They've been able to make some plays in the passing game, where Boise State was a team that Penn State was kind of willing to maybe give up some chunk plays in the pass game because they were just not going to let Ashton Genty beat them. And the reality is Boise wasn't good enough in the throwing game to do it. They got some chunk plays, just like Georgia got some chunk plays against Notre Dame. but you couldn't do it consistently enough to score on them. Notre Dame's not Boise State, right? Just like Ohio State's not Boise State. So if you dare Notre Dame to beat you throwing the ball the way that they dared Boise State, I think that's going to hurt you a lot more. Plus, Notre Dame has a quarterback that can hurt you a lot more with your legs than what Boise did. So they're not going to be able to just repeat that game plan, nor is Tom Allen going to try. He's a smart football coach. They're going to have one that's specific to Notre Dame. But the opportunities will be there just like they were against Georgia, but you've got to finish off blocks and execute those plays and then get your backs into space. And that's going to be a big key. But if they overplay the running backs like Georgia did, then guess what? Riley Leonard's going to have another big game just like he did against Georgia. And that's why that counter play worked. I mean, they were following it, and he just cuts it back. It wasn't meant to be a cutback. He just cuts it back because they were overplaying, kind of the direction of the backs in the offensive line. So Notre Dame's going to have to get creative in this game as well. That's what you have to do at this time of the year. I mean, goodness gracious, if Chip Kelly was as creative against Michigan as he was against Tennessee and Oregon, then Oregon's not the number one seed because they'd have got smacked by Ohio State in the Big Ten title game. You know what I mean? But like that's just kind of how you have to be this time of year. You got to be on top of your game as a coach as well. I got to ask, if Penn State's so good, how did they lose any games? That's what I'm trying to figure out, how they lost.
Man, I was thinking the same thing.
Man, you listen to some of these people in the chat. Are they 14-0 right? 15-0 right now?
They've been playing better since then, Brian. They're the best team now.
I was thinking the same thing. I am now worried. Penn State's 100% going to limit Riley Leonard. I'm freaking out.
But I was also told in the chat that Riley Leonard's going to have to go off in the pass game to win. How many times?
If he goes off in the pass game, this won't be a close game. Correct.
But I'm just saying, how many times have we heard, well, Riley Leonard's going to have to be able to pass the ball to win? Like, how many times have we heard?
Heck, we've said that, and to a degree. And
it's exhausting. It's exhausting.
It is.
All right. Anyway, Michael S., thank you for another super chat. Allard's skill compared to Stockton, who's better?
I mean, Drew Aller is way better than Gunnar Stockton. He's got more experience. He's got more arm talent. He's not going to give you the designed runs the way that Gunnar Stockton could.
Right.
But as Vince pointed out, Trev, I think you mentioned this as well. He can move the chains. If you don't have good pass rush, if you don't have good pass rush discipline, like if you're overrunning him or your tackles aren't holding up their gaps, he'll tuck that sucker and run for 15 yards and move the chains. Like Vince said, they'll do read zone stuff. And when they run read zone with Drew Aller, it's not meant to be a 50-yard gain where he's juking people and making people miss. If you make a mistake and turn him loose, he's going to keep running. But it's meant to, you're overplaying our backs. He's going to pull it on 2nd and 7 and run for 9 yards and 10 yards and move the chains. So he's not like some people I've heard, he's a stiff back there. No, he's not. No. Just because he's tall and he looks like an old school quarterback doesn't mean he's some immobile stiff back there. He's not going to run for 120 yards unless you make a lot of mistakes. They're not designing their game plan around him running like Notre Dame does with Riley Leonard. But this is a kid that can hurt you. It's very different to Gunnar Stockton. But his arm talent and his experience as a passer is to me significantly better than Gunnar Stockton. No question.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you brought it up best. To me, the biggest differentiator is like the experience piece. Like Gunnar Stockton has one start. You know what I mean? Like that's just so tough to compare.
Agreed. Yeah, I'm with you guys. Like look, he's a bigger, thicker kid. He's built differently.
He ain't thicker.
No, I was about to say.
Well, Gunner's just more sawed off.
He's definitely sawed off.
Yeah.
If you stretch Gunner out to 6'5" and added his weight, he's about 255, where Drew Aller's 235. You know what I'm saying? But I'm just messing with the events. Drew's a more like, you know what I mean? He's more
prototypical quarterback.
Yeah. Right? Gunner's Bryce, Georgia's version of Bryson Daly.
Yeah.
Body type wise.
Right.
Yeah. I told you Detroit Hunter didn't like Drew Aller.
He says Drew Aller is our best offensive player. Yeah. Wow. And by the way, he's meaning Notre Dame.
Meaning he's going to
make that very clear. So
I told you he didn't like Drew Aller.
Wow.
He's been hating. I've had to stick up for Drew Aller plenty of times in this chat because of my guy, Detroit Hunter.
Well, Full Life, thank you for the super chat. Notre Dame has played 7 games away from South Bend. 4 of those 7 are pro stadiums. 3, if you don't count Yankee Stadium. Any thoughts on how this might be benefit for the Irish?
I don't know that it's necessarily has been a benefit. I think it just comes down to they're the better team. I mean, I've said this, guys. well, why was Notre Dame such a tougher place to play in the 80s and 90s than it is now? Because they were a better team. You know what I mean? Like, you're just not going to beat that Notre Dame team back then at home. But then they'd have these occasional, like, how did you lose to Stanford, at home? You know what I mean? But like, I just think it comes down to you were the better team in those situations. Like, did they beat Georgia Tech because somehow playing in an NFL stadium, at that time
Like,
helped them
benefited
to
them?
No, they were just better than Georgia Tech. Now, do I think that helps them in a game like this? Potentially. Potentially it could, because, Penn State has only played one such game, but I mean, Penn State's also coming off of a Fiesta Bowl game where they handled themselves fine. I think stuff like this can get a little bit, it's not to say that it won't be a factor, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a factor. That one team has played in more neutral stadiums than the other. I don't know that it is. It still comes down to, once the whistle blows, it's about who plays the hardest, who executes the best, who plays with the most discipline, and whose players make the most plays. At the end of the day, that's really what it comes down to. And it's not, like, I don't think the stadium, I think the moment matters more. Like Trevor's thing against SMU and Penn State, it wasn't that, I don't know if they can play at Beaver Stadium. It was more of this moment, the magnitude of the game was going to be too much for them. And that's why he picked them to lose against Clemson, and it turned out to be true. And that's a big reason why he also picked them to lose to Penn State, is for that same, because you picked them to lose to Penn State as well also, right? And it's a similar type of thing. This team is not used to playing in this environment. These Penn State kids have played in Columbus. They've played at Michigan Stadium. You know what I mean? Like, they play in front of 100,000 every home game except for the playoff game. I don't think that the environment's going to be too big, and I think they've got 2 playoff games under their belt to kind of get used to the moment. This is going to be about who plays better, who executes better, who executes the game plan better, whose guys make the most plays. I think that's ultimately what it's going to come down to, not any of these other things that kind of we're talking about here. Trev, thoughts on that?
No, I agree. I mean, the only thing that I was going to say, you kind of touched on, was just, it only helps with the moment. The stadium and the setting doesn't help with execution, the X's and O's, scheming up a game plan. But I will say, I think Notre Dame has shown that they can, every moment that they've had, they've been able to handle this year. And I think part of that is by playing at Kyle Field and playing at Yankee Stadium and playing at MetLife Stadium and playing in, Yankee Stadium. They played in Mercedes-Benz Superdome this year, so I think it helps with the moment. The stage is never too big. You know what I mean? But no, it doesn't affect whether you execute a game plan better, right? Because Notre Dame played in Atlanta at Mercedes-Benz, that doesn't mean now that their offensive line is going to be able to handle stunts better because they've done it in that stadium, right? Like, it has nothing to do with the game plan. But the moment, though, and I think what the evidence to back it is how they performed against Georgia down in Louisiana. So
now we have a couple about Josh Pate. So I'm just going to bring the first one up, Vince, read it, and then we'll get to the second one and just kind of comment on it. The first one's just more of a comment.
Beezer12 Washing Beard, one of my favorite names. Thank you for the super chat. Pate picked Penn State 0-4 in Notre Dame games this year, by the way. You'd think he would learn his lesson. Nunk, thanks for the super chat. Pate picked against Notre Dame again. My theory is, as a Notre Dame grad, he secretly wants us to win it all and tries to motivate the team. But those injuries, the same ones they had going into the Georgia game?
Yeah, I guess. I don't know, man. I didn't listen to the show. I don't like commenting on things that I didn't listen to. I know that I've listened to Josh several times talk about Notre Dame this year, and I just don't think Josh has a firm grasp of who this Notre Dame. I think Josh thinks he knows certain things about Notre Dame and refuses to actually accept that those things might be wrong. And I also think he knows that the more he says these things about Notre Dame, you all are going to keep watching because you're going to get mad.
Yep.
And he's going to keep saying those things, which to a degree is what he wants. I don't know what Josh said about this game. Look, I don't think it's unreasonable for someone to pick Penn State, just like I don't think it was unreasonable for someone to beat Georgia or to pick Georgia to beat Notre Dame. I disagree with both. And Notre Dame proved that last week against Georgia, obviously. But you just look at it and there's just some people that just refuse to maybe think that their narrative about Notre Dame is wrong. and that maybe just because so-and-so wasn't ranked certain way by your 247 Sports Network, that maybe they were just wrong about that guy. And Leonard Moore's not a 3-star player, and he actually is really fast. You know, and now it's like, well, okay, but yeah, Jeremiah Love is fast, but, you know, insert excuse for why that they're not. So the reality is, when someone keeps telling you who they are, believe them.
Mm-hmm.
And you can choose to still engage with that point of view, which is fine if you want to keep listening. But if it bothers you, just stop listening. I mean, it's that simple.
Exactly.
Or engage them respectfully, because I think Josh is someone who, if you engage him respectfully, he'll engage with you. If you just take a shot at him and call him a moron, he's not going to engage with you respectfully, because you're not being respectful to him, nor will I. There's this notion by people who I've blocked that, well, he only disagreed with me because I disagree with him. Like, well, no, there's a lot of people on Twitter who I haven't blocked who I disagree with, and they disagree with me all the time. But when you act like an idiot and you start calling names, you start acting like a buffoon, I don't have to deal with that. So I'm just going to block you and not have to deal with your stupidity anymore. But, you know, engage with him respectfully. I think Josh likes talking ball. I just think he's wrong a lot about Notre Dame. You know, I mean, at one point in time, middle of the season, he's like, I think LSU has more potential than Notre Dame. Okay, at that point in time, I was done. I'm not listening to him anymore, because he's living in this world. The SEC is something that it's not this year, and he refuses to embrace the reality that, hey, maybe this Notre Dame team is more athletic than I thought. Maybe this Notre Dame team is actually more talented than I thought. He's still living in the world that Jack Kaiser's Drew White or Joe Schmidt.
Right.
He's still living in the world that Drake Bowen is Dan Fox. That's the world he's still living in. And I mean this with all due respect to Josh, because when you have a national program like his, you can't study Notre Dame the way that we do, where it's our job to study Notre Dame, right? So I give him a little bit of a break on that one, to be completely honest with you, just because it's hard to study everyone when you have a national show that covers everybody. I just think Josh has been very slow to accept the fact that this just isn't your big brother's Notre Dame team. This is more your daddy's Notre Dame team, because your daddy was following Notre Dame in the 1980s and early 1990s, when the reason that Notre Dame was the only team that could consistently go toe-to-toe with Miami was because they were the only team that could not only beat Miami in the trenches, but could run with Miami. And I think that's what's missing from people. It's like, Trev, you talk about all the time, teams consistently underrate how fast Riley Leonard is until they play him, and then they realize, oh, shoot.
Happens every
game.
Time.
Every game, some linebacker or safety from some really good defense,
terrible angle
to Riley Leonard, and he outruns him to the sideline. This time it was Georgia.
In key moments, in a 3rd and 7, when honestly that kid probably should have taken a better angle on Riley Leonard, and maybe he doesn't get the first down, but he just outran him to the corner. I mean, yeah, every game, man.
So, and there's a lot of people feel that way about Notre Dame. You know,
I think there's just, honestly, I just think a lot of people just haven't watched Notre Dame. I really mean that. Yeah, I mean, I was listening to the ESPN broadcast, and look, I understand if you have a national show. This isn't specific to Pate. This is just, you know, if you're ESPN and it's.
I do like Josh. I do. I don't think he has these troll takes where he just bashes Notre Dame. I just think he's wrong when it comes to his take on Notre Dame.
Sure. But like I said, this isn't specific to Pate individually. This is just with a lot of people. And look, during the regular season, if people want to say, well, you have a show that covers nationally, like I can hear that out. When it starts coming down to there's 4 teams left, you know, there's 8 teams left. How have you still not watched Notre Dame? I mean, I was listening to the pregame show from ESPN about the Notre Dame, and they were saying stuff that was just factually wrong. Like, not, oh, I disagreed with them. You know, they were saying things like, this is a bigger Notre Dame team than when they played each other in 2019. I was like, that is factually incorrect. Like, both of their tackles are under 300 pounds. This is not a bigger Notre Dame team. Like, in no way. I mean, maybe the linebackers are a little taller.
Trev, that was wild. They said massive offensive line.
Yeah.
That was this is a massive Notre Dame offensive line. I'm like, Notre Dame has one guy above 315.
Yeah.
One. They have more guys under 300 than they have over 315.
I mean, the amount of people that came on broadcast and said, yeah, this is a fully healthy Notre Dame team. Like, there was a guy going into the IU game talking about how good number 70 was at center. And it's like,
yeah, Todd McShay, a freaking national guy, is like, yeah, I really like this number 70 at center. And I don't think he was confused at what Pat Coogan's number was. I think he literally was just going off of he
watched the game early in the season and
didn't think about who's the center now. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I genuinely believe that I just don't think people have watched Notre Dame play. Legitimately. It's weird. And during the regular season, I can accept that because it's, there's 134 FBS teams playing. But when the college football playoff is happening and you're providing analysis, yes, I understand more bowl games are happening. I would hope that national analysts are paying more attention to the first ever 12-team college football playoff and the makeup of the teams in that, opposed to the teams playing in the Pop-Tart Bowl. But I've been wrong before. But no, I mean, to the super chats, though, I just think that there's some people that have this idea of what Notre Dame is, and they're having a hard time believing that that's not what it is, because some Notre Dame fans are having a hard time accepting that that's not.
There's no doubt.
I mean, we've even had some struggles on this show of coming to the realization that it's like, this team's pretty darn good, and so that, like, earlier in the season, obviously, because we could kind of start to begin to see the writing on the wall sooner than others, but I just think people don't watch this team play. And now if people are still getting analytics wrong about this team, there's 4 teams left and there's no excuse. Like, I think bowl season is over now too. So I literally think if people are still giving wrong takes, they're just refusing to watch this team out of fear of being wrong.
I think sometimes it's just laziness. And I'm definitely not talking about Josh on this one, but I think some of it's just laziness. It's just like there's a lot of scoreboard washers, and they'll just look at the box score of Notre Dame and Louisville and be like, well, Louisville outgained you by X number, and they don't actually realize that Notre Dame was outgaining Louisville by a ton until the fourth quarter, when Notre Dame was just kind of packing it in and Louisville was trying to come back from being down multiple scores. You know what I mean? Like, same thing with the USC game. Notre Dame was outgaining USC going into the fourth quarter. And then Notre Dame had 2 possessions in the fourth quarter. That's it. But they just look at the final stats and they think, oh, well, this is true, and this is true, and that's true, and that's true. Like, oh, Notre Dame gives up. Like, how many times has Notre Dame given up a final minute, game's over touchdown? You know what I mean? It's like every time. And so I just think that's what happens with a lot of national people. There's just like, I literally saw a guy on Twitter the other day. He was comparing the 2 teams, and he made 2 comments that I thought were nuts. He was like, he talked about, I think the Penn State running backs are better. Okay, we can have a conversation about the 2 Penn State running backs being better. I don't agree. I don't know that it's necessarily all that close, but I like them. I mean, Trev, we said in a show a week or 2 ago that I think that running back room is probably the second best in college football behind Notre Dame's, right? They both got 1,000 yards. Yeah, they played 14 games, 15 games now? Yeah, there's not a lot of teams would have 2,000-yard backs even at 15 games. You know what I'm saying? But then somebody responds and he's like, yeah, I got to admit, I haven't watched a lot of Jeremiah Love. Then why are you commenting on the comparison between the 2? Just say, man, I love Penn State's running backs. I've watched them play a lot and they're really good. And I'd be like, cool, I agree. We've said that on our show. I would not push back on your laziness if that's all you said. And then his other one was, he said, Drew Aller and Riley Leonard are both freaks, but I'm taking Aller. I'm like, okay, you want to say that you think Drew Aller is a better quarterback than Riley Leonard? I may disagree, but we can have a good conversation about that, because as you guys both know, just like I was a lot higher on Bo Nix than a lot of my compadres were last year on this channel during the season, I was also a lot higher on Drew Aller than a lot of my compadres on this channel were with Drew Aller and people in the chat. And you say, okay, you can have that take, but like, he's a freaky athlete. Like, are we watching the same Drew Aller? And I think there's just a lot of laziness, Trevor. I think there's a lot of groupthink, because now everybody's got a Twitter page and everybody's got a show and they got to say something. And so it's easy to just kind of go with what everybody else says, because you're not going to look as dumb. Like when you take a stance that's, I mean, look what we had to go through on our channel, Vince, when we first got started, because we'd hammer Brian Kelly. And you've seen some of the messages I've gotten from people for my takes on Brian Kelly before he left Notre Dame. Now everybody that's a Notre Dame fan didn't want him to be here anymore, and they're ready for him to go, even though my Twitter DMs would say otherwise. But I just think that's part of it too. And nobody wants to be that guy that, like, I remember we were listening. It was Todd McShay and and David Pollock. And David Pollock said, like, I think this Notre Dame team can win it all. And you'd have thought he just said that I think Boise State's going to win it all. The way that Todd McShay reacted to him. And I'm like, well, one of these guys has clearly watched Notre Dame. That would be David Pollock. And one of these guys has clearly not watched a lot of Notre Dame and still believes, like, because Todd McShay's always been real down on Notre Dame prospects and he gets proved wrong a lot. Just because he got Jimmy Clausen right, he thinks he's always right, and he's not. That's why he's no longer working at ESPN. But like you could tell, like, wow, what would make you think that? And I'm like, what would make you not think that after watching? Like, if you only watch Notre Dame in September, then you're probably going to come away thinking this is not a championship team. And guess who else thought they weren't a championship team in September? These three guys on this show, because they weren't a championship team in November or in September. But to act like this is still the same team that played Northern Illinois or Miami of Ohio or even Louisville tells me you haven't watched a lot of football since then. And to your point, Trev, I just think it's just lazy, to be honest with you. And that's how you can tell, like, the real ones. Like, I'm not saying this positive things about Greg McElroy because he says pro Notre Dame things, but you can, even when I disagree with Greg McElroy, you can tell he's put in the work to come to that conclusion. Right now, when he's doing ESPN shows, he tends to say ESPN things. I'm talking about on his podcast, when you get more of his honest assessments, in my opinion. You'd be like, okay, this guy studied the film. He was the only national person I knew before the season that was talking about how good this Notre Dame secondary was. He even said, this is the best. I think this might be the best secondary in college football. You know what I mean? Like, nobody has a problem saying that about Ohio State, so it's not hard to take that opinion. But everybody has a problem saying about Notre Dame. Well, this team's not athletically good. Like, are we still doing that thing? It's like, you ever notice every year people are shocked at how athletic Notre Dame players are at the combine? Every year. Like, wow, I didn't realize Chase Claypool was that fast. Did you not watch him play? I didn't realize Miles Boykin was that fast. Did you not watch him play? You know what I mean? Like, it's like every year. I'm shocked that I can't believe that Drew Tranquil's that athletic. Did you not watch him play? Like, I mean, where did you come to this conclusion? And you just get a lot of that with Notre Dame players. Oh, I didn't realize how athletic he was. I didn't realize how much speed they had. And you're like, well, yeah, how do you think they won all these games? Brian Kelly's good looks and charm? You know what I mean? Like, just because the head coach kept trying to convince everyone that they weren't that good, it was all because of his genius, doesn't mean that was actually true. And I think that's part of it as well. When your head coach talks down your program, the national people are going to believe those things. And I still think there's a lot of people still living in that world of the head coach talking down the program. There's a reason that this football team, when I talk to people behind the scenes, think that they were going to be really special this year. Because they knew this team had something that past teams did not. And they're showing it. So it's just laziness, in my opinion, guys. I really do. With a lot. Again, we're not talking about Josh per se anymore. It's just overall, there's just a lot of that. Just, okay, I don't want to take a stance that's opposite what everyone else. Because you ever notice, like, it was all Georgia till a couple people picked Notre Dame, and then all of a sudden everybody else felt more comfortable talking about how Notre Dame might win this thing. Do you ever notice it's like, that's not what you said a week ago. It's because, well, yeah, it's more acceptable now to say that. And yeah, that's where I'm at. That's where I'm at on this one. Just bad takes. There's some in the chat right now from some Penn State people. It's like, I'm not even disagreeing with you on how good you think Penn State is. I think Penn State's a really good football team. I think you're way off on how good Notre Dame is.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you can't keep winning games if they only throw for 90 yards. Well, how many times did they do that before this game? Like, just because they did it this game doesn't mean that's all they do. You know what I mean? And so it's just some really stuff like that, to be honest with you.
But the answer is yes, you can. You can win games like that. They just proved it.
So. Are they going to win the next two games throwing for 90 yards? No, I don't think they will, because I don't think that's that's how that game played out. You know what I mean? It's like they were up 23-10 early, and they're not going to do something that's going to let Georgia get back in that game. Georgia's eating up your offensive line. So you do different things, and you trust your defense. It's called playing team football. But I just think it's a lot of that, guys. I really do. I just think there's just a lot of laziness and people still living like this is 2012 Notre Dame, and it's not 2012 Notre Dame.
All right, we got super chat here from Savage Scion. Thank you very much. How do you think we will play in Miami, seeing how historically we haven't fared well there in recent years? I have BK PTSD right now. You got to flush it, man. The BK PTSD has got to be gone at this point based on how this season played out. I mean, the BK PTSD was left in Louisiana with BK. That's the way I look at it. There is no more of that. That's not who this team is anymore. So you got to let it go, man. You got to let it go. You went down to his backyard. Leave it there.
Yeah,
that's where I'm at.
Trev, thoughts on that?
No, I was just going to say, I don't, it goes back to the conversation that we had around the stadiums that you play in. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think Notre Dame as a program kind of has this bad juju of, oh no, as a program, we haven't fared well down in Miami. So we might lose this game. No.
Again, guys, this team is not those teams. This team is not last year's team. If this was last year's team, I'd be a lot more worried about this game. If this was 2022, I'd be a lot more worried about this game. If this was 2021, they wouldn't be here. I mean, it's like this, what happens in Miami on next Thursday will have nothing to do with what happened in 2017. They're not playing Miami, number one. And and I don't mean that like, oh, Penn State's not as good as Miami. It's just a different situation. It has nothing to do with the Orange Bowl history. Those are narratives that don't impact the game. Like when we talked about beating Georgia, it wasn't that like, oh, the Notre Dame players are now going to believe in themselves in a way they didn't a week ago. No, they went in thinking they were going to beat Georgia. The narratives were more related to the talking points, the national people, the pundits, the fans. That's where the narrative was destroyed. If the Notre Dame players didn't fully believe they could beat Georgia, they wouldn't have come out and played the way they did against Georgia. That's the reality of it. And to what my guys over here have said, it's like none of those things, Vince, you're right, flush it, because this is not Brian Kelly's team. This isn't Lou Holtz's team. This isn't Dan Devine's team or Charlie Weiss's team or Ty Willingham's team or Bob Davies' team or Eric Parsegian's team or Frank Leahy's team or Joe Kaharik's team or Newt Rockney's team or Jess Harper's team or anybody else's team. This is Marcus Freeman's team. And you evaluate it for who it is, not what somebody else's team was. It's like I started laughing early in the show because you guys were asking me to go look up the Joe Alt, or you guys didn't ask me. I said I was going to go look up the Joe Alt stuff. And he was 45, by the way. But it's like I'm just watching Brian Kelly run out with the team, and I'm thinking, thank God we're not there anymore. Because it just was a different era then. It just was and this team is not the same team it was in September. Just like Penn State's not the same team it was in November that struggled with Bowling Green and struggled with UCLA. They're a better football team now than they were back then. And so I understand. I said it last week, Trev. I understand people's hesitation for jumping in feet first. I don't know if they're going to beat Penn State. And if they do beat Penn State, I don't know if they're going to beat Ohio State or Texas. All I would say to you is enjoy the ride. Right? Like don't look at misery and think of every bad thing that could happen between now and Thursday, because you have no control over any of it. And just say, you know what, this team's 13-1. They've proven that I can trust them to go out there and give me their best. Is that going to be enough to beat Penn State? We'll find out. Is that going to be enough to beat Ohio State or Texas? We'll find out. But I have more confidence this team is going to win or lose by leaving it all on the field. There's not going to be any playing to not get blown out from this head coach and this football staff. They're going to go to play to win. And if it's not enough, then I promise you they're going to get back to the drawing board and say, what do we got to do to get better and so we can win it next year? So just enjoy the ride and flush that BKP. Because if you felt this way about playing in Miami, you definitely were going to feel that way playing in New Orleans against Georgia last week, a team they literally had never beaten in a bowl game that they hadn't won since since 1991 when Jerome Bettis was their running back. And the last time they played in it, they got destroyed by LSU. This is not those teams. This is a different team. Enjoy the ride for it, whether it lasts for, 4 more days or whether it lasts for, 15 more days? I have no idea, but enjoy the ride because this team is going to be fun to watch and they're not done yet, I hate to say to jinx it, but like, this isn't the end of this. This isn't a 1-year wonder situation. You look at this football team and what they've got coming back. And I was talking with somebody while I was making dinner about this. Like, They're going to look a little different next year because they're going to lose some really important players, but this is going to be a really talented team, man. You watch what's kind of waiting in the wings and what's coming back, and you're going to get Jagasol back next year. You're going to get Boubacar back next year. Leonard Moore's not going to be a rookie next year. Christian Gray's going to have a whole year of starting experience under his belt. Yeah, you're going to lose Xavier Watts, and you're going to have to try to replace him with Jadon Blair and Bronte Johnson and guys like that. Like, it's like it's somebody in the chat just put it like, y'all, we as fans need to adopt Marcus Freeman's philosophy: one play, one life. Just focus on the moment. Don't worry about what may be or what's coming down the road. Just focus on the moment and enjoy what's in front of you, right? Because otherwise you're missing out on a lot of fun. Like Saturday night after the game, man, let's talk about Penn State. No, I don't want to talk about Penn State right now. I want to enjoy this for a little bit. We'll talk about Penn State again. But I just want y'all to enjoy the ride. That's my best advice I can give you. But you don't need to have BK PTSD because here's why I'll say that final thing, guys. The last 3 years have confirmed everything we said about Brian Kelly. Like, we were going to find out. We said about this. We're going to find out if Marcus Freeman can truly evaluate talent like we think he can, and if Chad Bowden and the Notre Dame coaching staff can evaluate like we think they can. Were they right about the Leonard Moores and the Drake Bowens and the Jaden Alsburys, guys like that, or did we maybe overhype those guys? Not on purpose, because we believe we are wrong on their evaluations as well. Or he's going to prove that he is that good, and Chad Bowden is that good, and Mike Mickens is that good. And Brian Kelly was going to prove if we were right about him or if we were wrong about him, and it really was Notre Dame holding you back. What Notre Dame has done since he's left and what LSU has turned into should tell you that it was Brian Kelly that held Notre Dame back, and Marcus Freeman is not going to do that. And so that's where you can know, and this Saturday proved that. I mean, this Thursday proved that it's time to flush that down the toilet, because this is not Brian Kelly's Notre Dame team anymore. This is Marcus Freeman's Notre Dame team. And you know who looks like Brian Kelly's Notre Dame team right now? LSU. Because that's who he is. When people tell you who they are, believe them. Marcus Freeman has shown you who he is. Brian Kelly has shown you who he is. So you should flush that down the toilet. And if there was any remaining remnants of that, then they should have died on Thursday night when that final seconds ran off of that. When Notre Dame needed to put that game away with a physical, time-consuming drive against Georgia, where they were going at the one thing Georgia was good at, which was being big and physical, and they still did it. And that's where we're at. So it's time to – Vince nailed it. It's time to flush that BK PTSD stuff, because he has shown us in the last 3 years he is who we thought he was. And Notre Dame is what we thought it was. Meaning Notre Dame can get to the top of the college football world again. And Brian Kelly was the roadblock from it.
Mm-hmm.
And he's shown that at LSU. Now, will that be 2024 season? Will it be next year? I don't know the answer. But I said before the year, Notre Dame will win a title in the next 3 years. I'm more confident in that now than I was then. And it has nothing to do with whether or not they can do it this year. It's
right.
Just, I mean, he's shown that he's a force to be reckoned with, as will Ohio State, as will Texas, you know what I mean? But they're going to be right there with those teams. And the longer he has to get his talent, and Chad Bowden has to get his talent into this program, the better and better they're going to be. So flush it, like Vince said, flush it and enjoy this ride for however long it lasts. Because even though this version of this season may last 4 more days, and at the most can only last 15 more days, this is the beginning of something that's going to be a lot of fun to watch. So buckle up and enjoy it. Best advice I can give you.
There it is. So thanks for hanging out with us. A little bit of IB After Dark. Appreciate that very much. The boys will be back tomorrow at noon. So different time. So they'll be back at noon tomorrow with another show, because then Brian's going to hit the road and head down to Miami and, get the prep ready for the game on Thursday. So tomorrow at noon, and then of course Sean and I will be back at 5:00 on Monday as well, which is tomorrow. And so we got 2 shows coming to you tomorrow. So make sure you guys stay locked in. The Irish Breakdown. We're gonna have all kinds of good stuff for you every day leading up to Thursday, and then we've got the game and the post game show and all that fun. So Just make sure you stay locked in. So make sure you hit that like button, that subscribe button, that notification bell, share with your family and friends, jump on the boards at irishbreakdown.com. And again, make sure you stay locked in. And for the love of all that is holy, enjoy the ride, everybody. So for Brian and Trevor, I'm Vince, and we will talk to you next time on the Irish Breakdown podcast.